And we are live for this Freshers Week edition of the RAW Sport Quaran-Stream. For those who don't know about us, we are RAW Sport. We are the sports department of the University of Warwick's student radio station, award-winning student radio station. I'll add RAW 1251 AM. I am your head of sport, Josh Sim, and we have the live chat section open as well. So feel free to send in questions, comment along on what the stuff we talk about. But this is basically a showcase of what we do on a weekly basis. The Quaran-Stream, it's on every Saturday and will be on every Saturday, just dissecting a lot of the sports news that's going on at the moment. So a few housekeeping things. In the video description below, you'll see links to our Facebook account, our Twitter, our Instagram, and then also our podcast on Spotify, our interviews. There's also, I've put down the link to join our Fantasy Premier League account, co-run with the RAW Sport. As it's 3 weeks in, there's still plenty of time to join in all that madness. And also our welcome meeting, RAW's welcome meeting on tomorrow on Facebook, where you'll get to talk to many more people of the RAW exec and hear our plans for the upcoming term/year. So without further ado, we're going to start, just for those who may be watching, we're going to start with F1. Formula One. We're going to start with the Russian Grand Prix. We will then move into kind of a North American sports section comprising of the NHL, the NBA, and the NFL, hopefully all those three. And then we'll do a bit of, I'll just ask the people I've got on with me today for some freshers advice for freshers before rolling then into Premier League match week 3 and just dissecting all the talking points from there, and there were a fair few, so it should be a fun show. So with that, we will start with the F1, and so I will bring on firstly our honorary deputy at this point, a long-time RAW Sport member, Joe Spagnoli, joins me. Joe, how are you?
I'm all good. Shall we say deputy in absentia, considering I'm about 2 hours from RAW 12:51 AM at the moment?
Yeah, that works. That definitely works. With the two of us to talk about F1, we have the host of the Alternative View and politics student second year. We've got Cam Hall with us. Cam, how are you?
Not too bad. Yourselves?
Yeah, all good, thanks. And finally, the editor of the RAW Sports section of the RAW, Luke James, joins us as well. Luke, how are you?
I'm good. How are you all doing?
Yeah, all good. So we will talk. We are all fans of Formula One, and we'll talk about the Russian Grand Prix that took place recently. And there's the headline: Bottas triumphs in Sochi. We'll just drop the top 6 down below. As you can tell, Valtteri Bottas won. Max Verstappen came second. Lewis Hamilton came third, and then you can see 4th to 6th as well. Cam, I just want to start with you for a moment, because Bottas has not won a Grand Prix since the very first one of this clustered season in Austria. How much of this is a turning point for his season? How important was this win for him?
Well, I think you only had to listen to his message on the radio after the race, that to whom it may concern, F you, basically. And I think Bottas had been feeling under real pressure, I think, just because obviously there was a lot of hype surrounding him, obviously, and a lot of questions as well with Valtteri Bottas. I think the hype coming from the fact this was a condensed season, the fact that he himself was saying that he felt in a much better position at the start of this season. But obviously Lewis Hamilton had kind of run away with the season after that first race, and Max Verstappen as well was obviously starting to catch up. He has a very consistent record, including that win in the second race at Silverstone. So Bottas really wanted to overcome the questions. I think he's never, especially in the last couple of years, he's never really solidified himself in the Mercedes team in the same way Lewis Hamilton has. And with George Russell, Esteban Ocon sort of waiting in the wings, I think this win is vital for Bottas to kind of show that and really put on the evidence, really, that he's still got it, that he's still that top driver that can be that number 2 to Lewis Hamilton, but can also bring it to Lewis and also fight when Lewis Hamilton wasn't there as he was with the penalties this weekend.
Yes, and he was, and we will come on to talk about the penalties for that for a moment. Luke, I just wanted to, Hamilton, obviously we had the Italian Grand Prix, a highly entertaining one, which Pierre Gasly won. But then since then, Hamilton has rebounded. He won the last 2 Grand Prix, and then has had that run now ended by Bottas's victory. In terms of looking at the championship, was Bottas's win on Sunday kind of the tonic needed to keep this championship a contested one, as opposed to, expecting Lewis Hamilton to go on and win another drivers' championship?
In all honesty, I think the championship is gone at this point anyway. I feel like Bottas has given up so much ground in kind of the earlier weeks in the season. Of course, he won the opening race of the season, but since then it's been kind of all Hamilton. He's been very, very dominant, and barring a couple of quite kind of serious mistakes, both on Hamilton's part and the team, it's been quite comfortable for him. And even the victory this weekend for Bottas, it was a case of there not really being that much competition. Of course, Bottas did okay off the line, eventually got into the lead once Hamilton had served his penalties, and that was kind of the end of the race. Verstappen wasn't really in contention for the win. Hamilton was never going to be able to recover that time deficit. So yeah, I think in terms of the championship, this is going to be a year where Hamilton probably walks away with it again. And for me, it still feels like a matter of time rather than kind of if Hamilton will get over the line. I feel like it's a case of when. Yeah,
Joe, I can see you're nodding. What was your viewpoint of this weekend for Mercedes, for both Mercedes drivers, I guess?
I mean, the view from the weekend is it's probably the most predictable outcome of a Russian Grand Prix you could ever get. The Sochi Autodrome, all the problems it has, number one is the fact that it suits Mercedes, probably more so than any other circuit, the power unit advantage, the aero balance, the fact that Max Verstappen in that unbalanced Red Bull was less than 10 seconds behind Bottas at the finish line kind of opens up question marks about Valtteri Bottas, despite the fact he won the race. Bottas, it's always been his hunting ground. Hamilton has not been successful by comparison to him at the Sochi Autodrome ever since it first came onto the schedule. So I'm not surprised that Bottas managed to win it. And again, as has already been alluded to, the error came from the practice start infringements from Lewis Hamilton, the penalties that he accrued. Very, very similar, although that was more of a team issue back at Monza. So again, it feels more like the win was never a possibility for Lewis Hamilton. And ultimately, Bottas didn't really have much competition. As for the season, I mean, with the new venues coming onto the calendar soon, Imola, Algarve, the return to Istanbul, maybe Bottas can take advantage and get some surprise wins over Hamilton in these unexpected circuits. But honestly, I don't think that's a reliable possibility. And although it's only 40 points at this stage in the season, I think Hamilton is almost certain to win this. I mean, very few people were predicting anything other than the Hamilton Championship at the beginning of the season. This win aside, I really don't see it going any other way. Bottas needs to be more consistent. He needs to be far better in qualifying, and he needs to ultimately be taking this to Hamilton this year. And, in addition to having one of the most dominant F1 cars in the history of the sport in this Mercedes, Bottas just has not been close enough to Hamilton throughout this entire season. And when he has won, it's because Hamilton has made a mistake or the team has made a mistake. That was the case in Austria, and it's the case in Russia as well. Hamilton's going to be champion.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly, it's been an exciting couple of weeks, and then it does feel like we've been brought back down to earth a bit with the recent results. Looking at the championship standings, the drivers' standings predominantly, here they are. Obviously, again, shout out to Max Verstappen, who had 2 retirements coming into this race and put up a really good second place. You look at the standings, Cam, and obviously the top 3 are seemingly on a stage of their own at the moment. When you look at the likes of Norris, Albon, Ricciardo, that kind of midfield pack that is becoming a hotly contested one at the moment, who do you think will rise to the top of that kind of peloton in the middle?
Well, yeah, this is the closest midfield I think we've had in a good few years. I think I go as far back as maybe saying 2012, 2013 in terms of the fact, obviously, you have that top 3 who are just so far out ahead, but then the midfield, it is very unpredictable. And I think a lot of it comes down to reliability. It comes down to just the individual drivers putting in fantastic performances. I mean, looking at the drivers there, Alex Albon should be way ahead of Lando Norris, Daniel Ricciardo. He is in much better machinery in that Red Bull. And I think that points difference between Verstappen and Albon. Indeed, I think he's almost got double the amount. Verstappen's got double the amount of points that Albon has had, which I think just we know. Obviously, we saw with Pierre Gasly, and we saw that the fact that second Red Bull seat hasn't really been that strong, solid backup since Daniel Ricciardo left the team. Alex Albon should be far ahead, and if he can get his performances on track, he can put in more of what we saw in Mugello when he took that podium there, then he should be in fourth place. But I think in terms of the individual drivers, I would say Daniel Ricciardo is probably the strongest out of those drivers in that midfield battle. If you consider the machinery as well, I think Charles Leclerc doesn't have the right machinery to challenge there. Sergio Perez as well, I think he has a real point to prove, having been ousted by Aston Martin. He's put in a couple of very good performances in the last race. So I would say either Albon, Ricciardo or Perez will end up in fourth by the end of the season.
Yeah, I'll just quickly kind of go around the panel here. So Luke, I mean, same question really. Who do you think will finish in fourth place come the end of this season?
I don't disagree, to be honest. I think Albon is the obvious choice because, again, he's in a car that has proven that it should be that fast. You look at Verstappen is on 128 points, Albon only on 64. Of course, he's had issues kind of personally with some of his, of course, the dynamic of Verstappen being the number one driver. But you'd still expect a little bit more from Albon kind of in his first full season at Red Bull. I think outside of that, Norris has done so well at McLaren. Is by far outperforming where he probably should be at this point. And I quite like both of the racing points as well. I think not only because it brings somewhat of the kind of drama effect to the Formula One paddock, but they're also very much in races. They're hard to pass and they make it really interesting. So I think, yeah, there's lots to play for in the midfield. And again, Ricciardo as well is clearly a very, very talented driver. And just this year, his car isn't quite quick enough. I think next year could be really interesting because, of course, he's on the move too.
Yeah, Joe, I'll come to you again with the same question, really. Who will finish fourth in the driver's standings when you look at the field at the moment?
In looking at the field at the moment, Alex Albon absolutely should be in that fourth position. He's not expected to match Verstappen's points total, but at the moment he is so far behind. The fact that he's so far behind, despite Verstappen getting 2 straight retirements and getting like the retirement, for example, at the Austrian Grand Prix in the first weekend, he should be a hell of a lot closer either way. Honestly, if Albon keeps up this run of form, not only is he under threat of losing that Red Bull seat for next year, he could well be off the F1 grid in the next 2 years. He's underperformed that much. In terms of who it is, for me, it's pretty simple. Renault have the third best car on the grid. Daniel Ricciardo is a mile ahead of Esteban Ocon in that team battle. I think Daniel Ricciardo is going to finish fourth in the championship this year. The Renault is good in a straight line. It's consistent through the corners and in these midfield battles that we see basically at every race weekend now. Ricciardo is one of the best overtakers in the field. That hasn't changed this year. He's finally confident in that car. I think Ricciardo is the favourite to get that position. A couple of other names I will throw in, though. My driver of the day from the Russian Grand Prix, Sergio Perez, has got a point to prove. He's been outperformed by his teammate on a lot of race weekends this year. He's really come back into form in recent weeks. And the unluckiest driver on the F1 grid, probably this year and for the last few years, Carlos Sainz at McLaren. He should be a hell of a lot higher up standings than he is. Ultimately, it's reliability and bad luck that's put him there. Mistake on the first lap of the Russian Grand Prix aside, Sainz is going to be a lot closer come the end of the season as well. But Ricciardo is my prediction.
Yeah, it promises to be quite the race to kind of secure the midfield spots. I mean, we haven't talked a lot about the driver moves for 2021, but seats seem to be filling up at the moment. Cam, is there a driver? And I know there's plenty of drivers who have secured a spot, but there are plenty that haven't. Is there a driver you would recommend kind of looking out for and seeing what they can do in the last 7 races or so to kind of shore up their future in the sport for next season? Is there a driver that stands out that needs to perform, or should you're expecting to perform in the next 7 races or so?
I'm going to throw in 3 names, I think. Firstly, Sergio Perez. We know he's obviously leaving Aston Martin at the end of the season. Many would say rather unfairly, given the influence of Lawrence Stroll, keeping a driver in Lance Stroll, who is, I think, a very good driver, but I don't think on the level of Sergio Perez. Now, any team would be kind of stupid to let him get off the grid. And so he will want to end up in the best possible car he can, whether that is Haas, Alfa Romeo. So he's got a point to prove to try and really secure the best drive for him. Another driver as well, Pierre Gasly. Obviously, he had that fantastic win at Monza. And I think there's a growing sense that obviously people are talking about the second Red Bull seat. I think certainly for this year, or certainly for next year, they'll stick with Verstappen and Albon. But is there that possibility that Pierre Gasly may, through keeping up these strong performances, put himself in as a candidate for a seat for 2022, perhaps even get a move to another team if he can be confident they'll have a better car? I think the issue is that the top 6 teams are all decided on their driver lineup, so I don't think there's anywhere really for him to go. And another driver as well, Antonio Giovinazzi. Alfa Romeo and Haas, I think, could feasibly all 4 of their drivers not be in F1 next year. I think the Haas drivers, Grosjean and Magnussen, I think are both heading out at the end of the year. I think at Alfa Romeo, Kimi Raikkonen, if they are going to go with Mick Schumacher, I've heard they want to keep Kimi Raikkonen on just to kind of nurture Mick Schumacher, bring him on and really allow him to develop with the experience that Raikkonen has got. But of course, Giovinazzi has the Ferrari links as well. It may be in their interest to keep him, but he's going to need to have to show that he deserves that seat. And Giovinazzi, if he is off the grid this season, I don't see anyone else taking him on unless his performance has drastically improved, because he's been too error prone and he's just not really shown that pace that we saw in the junior Formula.
Joe, I could see you nodding along about some of Cam's answers there. What are your thoughts on drivers who face an uncertain future at the moment in the sport?
I'm a massive Pierre Gasly fan, so I think there is a genuine chance that he gets picked up by another big academy for 2022. I reckon he'll stay at AlphaTauri for next year, with the cars staying basically the same going into next season. That's a strong car. It suits him. I think he'll comfortably have the legs on Danny Kvyat or Yuki Tsunoda if he gets promoted from F2 into that second AlphaTauri seat. So good things ahead for Gasly. I completely agree with Cam about Alfa Romeo and Haas. Antonio Giovinazzi has not been good this year. I'd also throw that with Kimi Raikkonen as well. Really not been impressed by him, very frequently qualifying at the back of the grid. I would not be surprised to see a Sergio Perez, Mick Schumacher lineup at Alfa Romeo next year. Schumacher with the Ferrari links, Perez as kind of the senior nurturing driver. For Haas next year, Romain Grosjean, I can't believe he's still on the F1 grid. The combination of a lack of pace, a lack of awareness, and being error prone and oftentimes dangerous, especially earlier on in his career. Magnussen as well, his performances have not impressed me this year whatsoever. I can see someone moving over to Haas. I don't know who that would be, but I'd actually take a look at an F2 driver who's been pretty unlucky recently with the Ferrari links as well that Haas will like. Robert Schwartzman, the Russian, the reigning champion of the Formula 3 championship, until recently a contender for the F2 title as well. I think he absolutely deserves an F1 seat. With those Ferrari links, I can see him coming up as well. Driver under threat for the end of the season, just quickly, Danny Kvyat. I know Pierre Gasly's been amazing at AlphaTauri this year, but Kvyat has frequently underperformed and been a lot further behind than he should be. With Tsunoda having the Red Bull links, the Honda links as well, I can see him getting promoted. They want a Japanese driver in F1, and if anyone's going to move aside for it, it's Danny Kvyat.
Yeah. There's so many drivers and there's only so many spots that can be given out. So it promises to be an interesting one. Luke, I just wanted to ask you about, obviously, F1, they are constantly looking to update the rules and all that stuff. And we saw recently that they vetoed, or the drivers came out and were pretty clear, reverse grid races were not something they wanted in the sport. Do you understand why they didn't want that? Do you agree why they didn't want to have that implemented in Formula One moving forward?
Yeah, I get it. As kind of someone who watches F1, I would have personally liked to have seen it because I think it would be more entertaining. However, I think the argument that truly kind of cut through with me was something that George Russell said. So obviously he's at Williams, he would probably be starting kind of the sprint races at the front. And he simply said, well, it would be embarrassing for us because we'd just be passed really easily and we'd look stupid. And again, I think that's quite a compelling argument because you have people who have reached kind of the top of their sport into the kind of the top driving class that you can be. And then you get to a situation where, because they're in a slower car, you get put to the front of the grid and then they just get passed for fun. And we saw that kind of a couple of Grand Prix ago as well, where Kimi Raikkonen was right at the front in his Alfa Romeo. And then within a couple of laps, he'd dropped straight back down the order again. So as entertaining as it would be, there'd be an element of kind of, is it safe? Because we've seen kind of how that can be an issue too. And would it work for the drivers? Because you could simply have a race where Lewis Hamilton, Valtteri Bottas are just passing people for fun. So yeah, I get the concerns. It would be interesting, but kind of given Mercedes' stance on this as well, it's just simply not a realistic proposition, I'd say.
Yeah, and that goes down to inner politics. We obviously saw Stefano Domenicali is now taking over from Chase Carey as the head of F1. So it should be very couple of interesting weeks in terms of off the track and on the track. But that sort of wraps up. We've got a lot of sports we're going to cover. So that wraps up our F1 segment. So you're going to see a lot more of Joe and Cam in a bit, but we're gonna have them off for this part of the show, and we're going to talk to Luke, because Luke, I know you're a big fan of ice hockey, and obviously we had one of the biggest events in arguably North American sport. The Stanley Cup series took place, and Tampa Bay Lightning secured their second ever Stanley Cup, beating the Dallas Stars in 4-2 in a best of 7 series. I did want to ask you, how significant is this victory, this success for Tampa Bay, given that it's been 16 years since they last won the Stanley Cup?
Oh, it's massive. And again, I think this is a franchise that over the past kind of 24 months has been the most consistent and has been the best team in the NHL. So I think this is probably what they deserve. And I think it's kind of about time that they got back to the point of winning the Stanley Cup, because that's kind of the trajectory they've been on. And I think more broadly as well, it kind of justifies the approach that they've taken, because Tampa Bay have really focused on getting a lot of players onto the roster who are skillful, who aren't just guys who are just going to kind of whack people in the finals and hope to win that way. It's like a genuinely good team and genuinely entertaining team too. So in terms of how the NHL looks as a product, I think it's positive that a team like that has won the finals as well, simply because it's a more attractive brand of hockey. And I mean, the playoffs, the Stanley Cup final as well said this as well, because the Stars won game 1 4-1, and then there was a real back and forth between the two teams. Of course, you had a couple of overtimes. You had 2 periods of overtime in one of the games too. So yeah, I think for Tampa Bay, this is a huge moment for their star players like Stamkos. It's really positive too. And I think for the NHL, this is probably the series that you would have wanted to see, having kind of taken in mind what had happened before in the bubble and how kind of weird this season has been as a whole.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I just wanted to quickly ask you about the success of the NHL and kind of holding this postseason, as maybe it hasn't been reported, but we know there's been 0 coronavirus positive cases, and it seems to have run very smoothly. And it indeed was one of the first North American sports to come back. So just wanted you to comment, I guess, on how successful the NHL have been in bringing back the return of professional sports.
It's been really, really amazing to see, to be honest. And I think Gary Bettman, who's the league commissioner, deserves a lot of credit, because the NHL has been by far the most smooth kind of reintroduction to sport. I think a big part of why the NHL was so successful is because they didn't rush. They took their time. And that's a huge difference between how kind of MLS started off, if that's one of the main comparisons. And you see with the NHL as well, is they chose 2 cities that just made sense. They picked kind of Toronto as one of them. And again, you compare this to where kind of the NBA and MLS restarted their seasons in Miami, in one of the United States kind of coronavirus hotspots. It just, again, it was just well thought out, well planned. They took their time to make sure all the measures were in place, all the players were up to speed, and they produced a pretty good product as well. If you watch the games, it wasn't a case of it feeling very kind of eerie because it was behind closed doors. There was still quite a good kind of television product to go with it too. And off the ice as well, the players were clearly very well looked after. Following some of the teams on social media, following kind of Toronto FC on social media as well, you had the players, especially on the Toronto site, all kind of living in and around BMO Field, which is where Toronto FC play. And they just basically had free room to do whatever they like within that area because it was COVID secure. And I think that makes a huge, huge difference, both kind of to the players, to the games that were played, and also to how kind of people perceive the league, because they've handled it so professionally. And again, they've got the result they wanted, because they've got the whole way through the playoffs, no positive cases, everyone's safe, the players are back with their families, and basically everyone's happy.
There we go, and it's been the example to follow, I guess, for all the other sports. Thank you, Luke. We will have you back on to talk about Freshers Week advice and also football in a bit. So we'll shift gears to the NBA. I just want to quickly remind for those who are watching, the live comment and chat section's open. So if there are freshers out there, do send in your questions, comment along. We will get to. I'll just quickly remind people who have just joined us. We'll run through the NBA now, then we'll quickly move on to the NFL, talk a few freshers advice questions, and then move on to the Premier League, of course. So here to talk NBA finals with me, we've got Jacob, or X1, fellow Raw exec. First sports show, Jacob.
Thank you very much for having me on. I'm excited to talk NBA.
There we go. So Lakers Heat is the lineup. The first game is tonight, and as I've kind of put there, the LeBron derby, because as we both know, and people may know, LeBron James has a history. He's played for both teams. So let's start with the Lakers on the West. Now, it's been a hell of a final playoff season from the West. Obviously, the Clippers bowed out a lot earlier than people expected. The Nuggets, by contrast, went further than people expected. But at the end of the day, are we surprised at all that the Lakers managed to get themselves into a finals appearance?
To be honest, personally, it was no surprise to see the Lakers in the finals. But I think just the consensus that the Lakers were 100% at least going to be in the conference finals, because they had that addition of Anthony Davis to LeBron's pairing, because LeBron effectively had his first off season in over 16 years. But LeBron peacefully said, I think in an interview, he was like, "Oh, I'll enjoy this holiday, time to rest and rebuild." But you could tell he wanted to be in the finals desperately, and that showed this season and in this bubble season, we'll call it. The Lakers in the finals isn't a shock, because it's LeBron, Anthony Davis, and a few key pieces built around them to produce what is a championship level team.
Yeah, and it is worth mentioning that both the Lakers and the Miami Heat were not playing in the playoffs last year, so it's quite a change that they've managed to find themselves on the biggest stage, at least of the sport. And I mean, we'll talk about the other side, Miami. I guess not many people had them going into the finals, it's fair to say, but they overcame. I think it was the Pacers they overcame, and then they beat the Bucks, which was quite the result, and held off Boston. So what have you made of Miami as they prepare for a final series against their former player in LeBron?
Honestly, Miami it wasn't a team that was even on my radar, to be honest. I knew they had Jimmy Butler, I knew they had Iguodala, both like good players, but it wasn't really a team I thought, oh, I better watch them. If you look back at Miami, this is definitely not the 2010 team where they had Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, but this is, I'd say it's a rags to riches story, where it's a team that, people thought, they'll definitely enter the playoffs, but in no way were we saying, they're going to beat a team with Giannis. No way are they going to beat who else did they beat? No way are they going to even come close to beating Boston. Boston, who are a team that just beat the reigning champions. So Miami is a team where I'd say they have that dog mentality. No one's looking at them. They're not like a flashy team with fancy tactics or fancy moves, but they're just playing hard and playing good basketball.
Yeah, and exceptionally well coached as well. Eric Spoelstra doing a fantastic job as he does. I'll ask you predictions after this question. I did want to ask you. I mean, you've watched. I mean, the bubble. We had a few games before the playoffs, but it's fair to say it's been an unorthodox season, but it's still provided a lot of entertainment. What's to you has been the highlight of this kind of bubble set of games so far?
I think the highlights, I'd highlight two specific players. I'd highlight Tyler Hero and Luka Doncic.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
First of all, Luka coming in as Rookie of the Year last year. Everyone was like, Luka's the next up. He's the next guy. I feel especially in this bubble, in the season, he played fantastically. But especially in the bubble, Luka has proved, no, he's not the next guy. He is the guy for the moment. He is a young player who's still developing. The shocking thing is Luka is only in his early 20s, so the sky is the limit for Luka. And if we look at what he's already done, who knows where he'll be in 2-3 seasons' time. So Luka Doncic just, I'd say, cementing himself in one of the top 10 players right now. And then Tyler Hero, another very young player, just coming in, and then low minutes in the beginning, maybe not the go-to guy, but seeing him in this finals run for the Heat, just seeing him just go off and just show off that, yes, I'm here in the NBA and I deserve to be. Those two players are just two players that stuck out in my mind throughout.
Yeah, I mean, Doncic, I think I mentioned it when he hit that buzzer-beating game winner against the Clippers. I think that arguably for me is the biggest sports moment of the year. So it was an unbelievable shot. And then as for Tyler Hero, as you said, I mean, I think he's the first player in the 2000s, born in the 2000s, to be playing in the NBA finals or something like that, which is remarkable. And you have to wonder he was drafted 14th. So you wonder all the 13 other GMs are probably kicking themselves at the moment, thinking they could have had quite the player. We'll come to predictions now, I guess. So best of 7 series for those who don't know, NBA finals. Who do you think's going to win and in how many games?
See, I am going to go with the shocking opinion of I see it going to a game 7. These two teams that neither of them have swept in their lead up. They both won, I think, in each series, won 4, lost 1, and they both had difficulties. Anthony Davis did sustain a minor injury recently, but he has supposedly fully recovered. So I see it going to a game 7, and I'm saying Heat in 7. That's my sort of take on it, because they have been this team where they're just fighting. It's not the finesse, it's not the Showtime-esque style of LeBron and AD and all those pieces, but it's just a team that's coming at you with everything they've got, and they won't take no for an answer.
Wow, Miami to win in 7. Wow, that is, I mean, it feels like a bold prediction because no one thought they'd be here. So I will say Lakers in 6. I do think, like you, it'll go somewhat into the distance. And I do think Miami, like you, I do think Miami are probably the biggest. If Boston had gone through, I don't think they would test the Lakers in terms of their matchup compared to Miami. So should be a really interesting NBA Finals series. Thank you, Jacob X1, for joining us on this. And we will definitely talk more NBA this time.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you to Jacob X1 for joining us. We will now switch gears to the final North American sport we've got on the lineup, and that is NFL. And for that, there was only one person we could bring in, and that was Jack South. Jack, how are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, how are you?
Yeah, I'm all right, actually. And I think we were both pretty happy on Sunday. Let's start there with the Seahawks, the team that we both we both support. They held off the Dallas Cowboys 38-31, a pretty high-scoring game. And if DK Metcalf could have made it to the end zone a lot faster, it would have been a more comprehensive result. But what were your thoughts on that game, and also on Russell Wilson, because he seems to be one of the leading candidates for MVP at the moment?
Russell Wilson has performed insanely well so far this year. Obviously, he's had 2 Offensive Player of the Week awards in just 3 weeks, which is just absolutely phenomenal. I think I don't know if you've been following, let Russ cook is definitely working for them. Just having Russell Wilson pass the ball, shifting the Seahawks kind of away from being a running team into the passing team they've always been able to be. It's just been absolutely phenomenal for them, and it's working really well. I feel like games like this are kind of exemplifying for me how the NFL, without the crowds, the defenses are underperforming quite severely. I wouldn't have expected this Cowboys team to score that well against the Seahawks, especially with all these great stars in the Seahawks secondary and even on their line. So I think it's really kind of exemplifying that, and I definitely woke up my house cheering when the interception went in on the final play.
Yeah, it was a big result. And Seattle are now 3-0, and there's not many teams that are 3-0, so definitely looking good. Of course, this was all kind of then usurped by Monday Night Football, a big clash, Kansas City Chiefs against the Baltimore Ravens. It was hyped up. Obviously, it's 2-star quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes. And in the end, it's fair to say one really showed his class in Patrick Mahomes, putting in a stunning performance to help the Chiefs win 34 to the Ravens 20. What did you think of that game?
Yeah, well, obviously there's a lot of debate about who's better between Lamar and Mahomes, and it goes back and forth. But I think this game really kind of shows the difference in class between the two. The Chiefs just severely outperformed the Ravens here. I think that Lamar is really more of a runner than a passer as it comes to it. He reminds me of quite a bit of like a Michael Vick from back in the day. So I think that Mahomes has the proper full-out 50-50 flexibility that Lamar's just kind of lacking, and that shows here in the scoreline.
Yeah, it was a pretty stunning performance from that. And then I guess, looking at all the other games, I guess, what was the other thing that I guess stood out for you? Because when I was putting this together, I knew obviously Seahawks Cowboys we were going to talk about, and then obviously this game. What was the third thing that kind of stood out for you? I mean, there's a lot, obviously. I'll just list a few. I mean, Josh Allen again looks very good and helped the Bills overcome the Rams. You have Mitchell Trubisky getting benched for Nick Foles, and the Bears overcoming the Falcons, and the Falcons are not in a good place right now. But the Bears going into 3-0, and and then a whole bunch of other results. Packers beating the Saints 37-30 as well. That's a pretty big game. What was the third, I guess, another big headline that stood out to you from this weekend's?
I actually want to talk about the Patriots, because I think the Patriots, they seem to have been stripped of everything. They've been given Cam Newton, and no one was really quite sure how he would perform. But he's just come out of the gate straight away and kind of like reassured all the Patriots fans. And to be honest, I'm reassured in this Patriots team. I think that there was a lot of doubt put into them, but they've just outperformed all the doubters. And Cam Newton under center has just been actually really brilliant for them. And they've reshaped their whole offense around him as well. Tom Brady obviously didn't have the legs that Cam Newton has, and so they've shaped it for him, and it's worked out really well. Beating the Raiders, obviously, in the most recent week. Yeah,
beating off a Raiders team that are doing okay, not excelling at the moment. It's fair to say. Before I let you go, obviously we should note that in terms of the RAW Warwick Wolves NFL Fantasy League this weekend, it's you against me.
It is, yeah, I noticed.
Matchup. So, I mean, we're both 2-1.
We are both 2-1. I was the highest scorer of last week on a points basis. I just feel like I need to let you know that in advance.
Okay.
I think I got lucky because I had Tyler Lockett in my team, who scored 3 touchdowns for the Seahawks. So,
yeah. I mean, I think I'm right in saying both of our teams have avoided major injuries so far.
Yes. Yeah, I've got one injury on the bench, but obviously I can just leave him on the bench. So I've been all right in that kind of respect. So I'll be interested to see how that goes.
Yeah. We've both got major injuries. Actually, I do want to ask you, Nana, on the subject of injuries, what do you think's been the biggest injury so far this season? Obviously, Saquon Barkley's gone and is out for the season. I mean, that's the biggest. Is that the biggest season-ending injury? Do you reckon?
I reckon so. I think the Giants have such a lack of passing game that they need Saquon Barkley just all the time. Dan Jones just isn't performing right. Like, the lack of Saquon Barkley is just going to absolutely destroy that team.
Yeah, seemingly it is. Jack, I know you have to go, so thank you so much for stopping by.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no worries, and may the best Raw exec win on this weekend in fantasy.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off there.
No, I was just saying, we'll see how it turns out.
Okay, I thought there was a bit of trash talk coming in. I was gonna fight back with one of my own. All right, Jack South, our chief engineer, joining us there. So that concludes our little mini North America sport section. Quick reminder: you can obviously join RAW Sport on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. You can join us. Those links are in the video description, as I said. Also, there is links to our Spotify interviews, the Fantasy Premier League, which we will come on to because we have Carl Henningway waiting in the wings, and it's fair to say he had a very good weekend in terms of FPL. And we've also got our welcome meeting tomorrow. The link for that is also there. So join us to find out more about plans coming up for the upcoming term and year. And obviously you can comment along in the live chat section as well. If you've got any questions about any topics we've covered, or anyone here you wanna ask them something, that's there. So feel free to do that. So before we get to the Premier League, we will bring back everybody else on and introduce Carl Henningway, actually, because he's the one that hasn't been on yet. So if I bring back, we have Joe Spagnoli, we have Luke James, Carl Henningway joins us, and Cam. Oh, there we go. There's the 5. Obviously, guys, it's Freshers Week. We've all been in this. We've all experienced this once at least. Joe, it might feel like a long time ago for you.
In 83 years.
Yeah, there we go. So I did want to ask, what is I guess my one question for everyone is, I guess, what advice would you give your younger self who was starting out this? Let's start with Carl, since you've just joined us.
What the advice I'd give to my younger self just joining?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a hard question, because I did everything wrong in my first year. I think the one main thing that you always got to do is join RAW, obviously, and maybe the Boar if you're feeling interesting. Just got that in for Luke. Maybe the Boy, but the RAW is obviously the one. If I join this station straight away and got engaged with all the people here, I would have had a better first year, full out.
There we go. And actually, we will drop in our socials down there. Everyone's covered. Don't worry. Cam, you obviously you're it's the most, I guess, fresh. You're the freshest of us to have experienced Freshers Week. Anything you wish you would have known, or any advice you'd give to those starting out?
I guess very similar to Carl, really. I guess obviously join RAW. I didn't join RAW actually till lockdown started, and I think actually looking back on my first year, it is something I think I would have made a lot more of in my first year had I had the chance. I think certainly from a personal experience, I would say is learn to cut corners where you can. I came to uni. I think I definitely put a bit too much time in the academics in first year, and I look back on it and I think there are some readings that you don't need to do, or there are certain things you can flag. You can save them to when you need to do it. Just learn where you can cut corners. Learn where you have to obviously put the hard work in, put the graft in, but really get that balance right. I think that's the thing about first year, is really use it as an opportunity to try new things and get things wrong as well, but get things wrong and learn from them. Yeah.
Luke, obviously, join RAW Sport is probably one of the first things you advise freshers to do. But other than that, obviously, I mean, feel free to talk about what people gain from joining RAW Sport, and also what advice would you give to freshers as well?
Kind of my main piece of advice to freshers is just do what you actually want to do. Like, don't feel pressured into doing something you don't want to do because you just won't enjoy it. I speak as someone who has been to this says a lot. I can't even remember what the club on campus is called. I've been there once on the first day I was on campus. So like, just do what you like basically, and you'll have more fun that way. In terms of the Board, definitely join if you like sport. We have cool press access to kind of various teams in the region, so that should be fun. But yeah, just basically do what you like. Learn to cook and don't be ridiculously messy, especially in lockdown, because your flatmates will hate you.
There we go. Joe, I come to you to round this off. Any advice?
Yeah, don't be messy in your kitchens, because your flatmates, brackets, if they're like me, will especially hate you in lockdown conditions. Further to what Cam said earlier, learn to cut corners. When I had done more of the reading than my actual seminar tutor in first year, I felt like such a mug. I've just finished my degree, got a first after having cut so many corners in my final year. Seriously, just enjoy freshers as much as you can. I know these are difficult circumstances, but further to what everyone else has been saying, join RAW Sport, join RAW Sport, because in all of this mess, it's actually a really unique opportunity. We wouldn't be doing streams like this if it weren't for the COVID-19 conditions. It can't get much easier. All you need is a phone, if it's got a microphone on it, and you can become, well, a sports journalist in quotation marks, just like the rest of us. Join RAW Sport, join RAW Sport, join both societies, get as involved as you can, because let's be honest, university is far from normal this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've reminded me to plug, I guess, I mean, if you're watching this, you are watching on our YouTube channel, and you can see how we kind of started all these streams last term. And also some interviews that we did. We talked to Crystal Palace, at the time, West Brom, now Crystal Palace defender Nathan Ferguson, who I know is a popular FPL option for his low price tag, but also a very talented centre-back, full-back. So we talked to him. We've talked to Ed Aarons of the Guardian Sport, deputy sport editor. We've talked to Jones from the Athletic as well, Daniel Taylor. So yeah, it's a really exciting time to be joining Raw Sport. And as a Ball Sport, I know that you talked to Vachon Neuville. Is that how you pronounce his name?
Yeah, Vachon Neuville. Was one of them. We did Matt Gooden, who plays for Coventry City, and kind of somewhat bizarrely, we also got Robbie Lyle from AFTV.
Yes, that is probably the biggest name of the ones we've just mentioned. Right, and speaking of Robbie Lyle, we'll turn to the sport he covers the most, and that's the Premier, and that is football, and we are namely talking about the Premier League. That's a good I'm pretty proud of that transition, actually. Premier League match week 3. I'll just drop the scores down here. A busy weekend that started, and we will get to Brighton. That started off the weekend, Carl. Don't worry. But also we had some Carabao Cup action. It would be remiss not to mention last night. I don't know if anyone watched this game, but I think the biggest takeaway is Eric Dyer's toilet break. If anyone wants to disagree. Joe, you
Please
look confused.
Explain. I have not heard about this. I hope this wasn't on the pitch.
Right, I wasn't watching the game. Was anyone here watching the game before I try and explain? Luke, Cam? No, okay. Joe, basically, with 76 minutes ago, I think, around that time, Eric Dyer, as he tells it, nature was calling. And so he sprinted down the tunnel to the dressing room, with Jose Mourinho steaming behind him. Meanwhile, Chelsea had a chance and nearly scored. And then they didn't. But Dyer then emerged, and then a fuming Jose Mourinho then emerged after. So that was the incident in short.
And he was part of the match playing 11 at that time?
Yes.
God, it is so telling that they conceded no more goals with Eric Dyer off the pitch than they did with Eric Dyer on the pitch.
There we go.
You have to ask though, if Amazon cameras were there again for another season, that would have been iconic.
I know. Oh, yeah, it's a
exclusive access.
It's a lost opportunity unless they're filming a sequel, a second season, and it hasn't been announced yet. In which case, we're all here for it. But okay, so we'll turn our attention to the Premier League. There's obviously Carabao Cup action coming up, but coincidentally, 2 of the games that we had this weekend, those teams will play each other again. So we will come to that. But I believe, and probably the biggest result of the weekend was probably the game in Manchester. Manchester City losing 5-2 at home to Leicester City. Jamie Vardy with a hat-trick. Plenty to unpack from this game. So Cam, I'll start with you on this one. I guess the question is what happened? What is wrong with Manchester City and Pep Guardiola? How did Leicester manage to exploit them defensively?
Well, I guess it ultimately boils down to the defence. It's the first time in Pep Guardiola's managerial career, going nearly back 12 years now, that a team that he's managed has conceded 5 goals. And we saw that Ruben Dias has come in £63 million in the last 24 hours or so. Very young, obviously not Kalidou Koulibaly with all of the experience that he's got. Whether that is enough for the Man City defence to get that overhaul it needs, because there are some fantastic players there. Obviously, Aymeric Laporte wasn't playing. It would have been interesting to see the impact he had. But in general, the defence was a big problem. It was just leaking too many goals, making too many errors. And again, to concede 3 penalties in one match is just ludicrous. But I think in a general side, obviously the defence was one problem, but just the balance of that team. Yes, they were missing Aguero. Yes, they were missing Jesus. And yes, they had to play Raheem Sterling up top, which is not a position that he's used to. But with the amount of creativity in that team, they should have had enough really to at least score more goals, or not basically score more goals, but at least be more balanced, at least really not give Leicester a sort of a pushover where it turned to in the end. But Yeah, it was just a messy, unbalanced, error-strewn performance from Guardiola's team. I think he'll be an exception. City will bounce back. Guardiola will not let his team forget this performance. Whether Ruben Dias is the solution for that defence that City still need to sort out, I don't know. But certainly, I think go back to what we were saying at the start of the season, Liverpool versus City for the title. This is a really big dent in City's push for the title this season. And seeing the way Liverpool have played in the first 3 games this season, I think it's just become a whole lot harder after watching that performance.
Yeah. It was certainly quite the result and a very unexpected performance we thought we were going to see. Joe, we've talked about City and we've praised them at times when they've produced outstanding football, but clearly this is a team that has serious and very obvious weaknesses at the moment. What was your take on their performance? And then I guess, as Cam mentioned, Ruben Dias has arrived from Benfica, Nicolas Otamendi going the other way. Do you see this being an easy fix? Does Dias's arrival kind of plug the hole that is clearly gashed open, or does there need to be more to fix City's mistakes?
Concerning Ruben Dias, I think the concern is far more fundamental and tactical than in terms of just pure personnel. You talk about us praising Manchester City for years. I've been criticising Manchester City for years at the back, even when they were winning the Premier League title quite comfortably. Even so, I was in utter disbelief because I saw most of this game. Utter disbelief at some of the defending I was seeing. A couple of weeks when we did the last stream, I said that Timothy Castagne was a stupid signing for Leicester and he wasn't going to work. Typical. First time this season, I've got egg on my face already. He put in an absolutely amazing performance, cutting open the Manchester City defence to find those assists for Jamie Vardy. The thing about Manchester City's defence is, yes, they make an awful lot of mistakes, but they are unbelievably simple mistakes to make. For a team that plays such complex Spanish-style football, they really do mess up the basics an awful lot. We've seen it in the Champions League, and now we're seeing it with Premier League defending as well. It's a similar story to what we've seen with Chelsea over the summer. You can't just sign a couple of centre-backs and expect all these problems to go away. Thiago Silva had an absolutely shocking debut against West Brom this weekend. I don't see much of a reason why Ruben Dias's debut would be so much better for Manchester City. I personally don't think he's worth anywhere near the fee that they've paid for him. That's the second time this summer that Manchester City have drastically overspent on a player. They've got Otamendi going the other way, who in the last few seasons has been a bit of a liability. But again, he was far from that when he first joined. This is a case of Manchester City defenders regressing badly and quickly. I've been saying right from the beginning that Liverpool were going to win this Premier League title. I didn't think it would be by an awful lot. I absolutely echo what Cam says. This is a league now where you really can't afford to drop points, especially early in the season, against a team that we were predicting would barely be holding on to the top half. Leicester did not play brilliantly in this game, but they were clinical, they were simple, and they exposed the problems that Manchester City had at the back. And again, Timothy Castagne, fantastic performance. Better than any Manchester City defender on that pitch, especially going forward.
Yeah, Joe, I don't think what we foresaw with Timothy Castagne was that they would play him as a right back and move James Justin to the left side, as opposed to what we thought was going to be Castagne on the left and Justin on the right. So I guess that has worked out for Leicester. Luke, I mean, we look at the other side. Leicester were put in one of their best performances in terms of a counter-attacking display and kind of, getting themselves out of that Man City press to create space in behind and create, as we saw, 5 goals.
Yeah, Leicester were impressive, and it's easy to talk about kind of City's mistakes and kind of where kind of Man City weren't great in terms of pressing, but Leicester played really well. The 2 central midfielders, Mendy in particular, was very, very good. And again, when you've got someone like Jamie Vardy who just kind of scores for fun, the goal that he did score from open play was very, very impressive. And again, this is someone who's getting better with age as well. It's easy to forget kind of how old he is at this point in kind of Premier League terms. Leicester were impressive. What struck me about this game kind of in particular as well is how bad City's press was. And again, we talk about how Leicester were able to play through it. And they did very well. But Leicester were winning the midfield battle too. And they only played with kind of 2 central midfielders in there for most of the game anyway. And what could be an issue is if they persist with kind of Mahrez playing on one side. He's not someone who commits an awful lot to the defensive side of the game, nor does he seem interested in committing to the defensive side of the game. And with City's tactic, you need everyone to be engaged in the press. And if they're not engaged in the press, it becomes very easy for teams who grow in confidence throughout the match to break through that. And I feel like this was just a prime example of a team who, Leicester, don't get me wrong, they're a good team, but I feel like the consensus at the moment is that fixture congestion, especially with them in the Europa League, is going to hurt them kind of this season, can play through them. And again, it's a really good example as well of Man City spending an awful lot of money and still not seemingly having the defensive personnel to kind of deal with these kind of problems. On Ruben Neves as well, I mean, what struck me as well is obviously this is a huge signing in terms of the money involved. It's what, £64 million, and no one really is talking about it that much. It's kind of become commonplace for Guardiola's Manchester City to drop 64 million on a central defender who's untested in one of the top 5 leagues, and just kind of, we assume that it will work out and we'll assume that it will be good value for money. So yeah, I think Man City need to sort the defence out. They need to sort the pressing out kind of going forwards. But as you say, a brilliant, really, really good result for Leicester.
Yes, sorry, I was just having a look there. I just wanted to have a look at Man City's spending. They spent nearly £400 million on centre backs, it seems. And you think about Diaz, obviously Nathan Ake, which Carl, I'm going to ask you about in a sec, because obviously signing Nathan Ake, surprise, surprise, does not solve City's problems at the back. You look at, obviously, they have John Stones on their books, so they spent a lot on Kyle Walker, João Cancelo. I mean, the list goes on, and it clearly hasn't gone to plan. Carl, I guess your take. I mean, we knew Nathan Ake was not going to be the savior for Man City. He did score though, so he did contribute on the other end. But I mean, as a Brighton fan, are you worried about playing Man City, or do you think this is like the most vulnerable they've ever been in the Premier League?
I think people will look and be like, wow, they got shown up, and teams are going to now look to try and take advantage of whatever holes were exploited by Leicester City, and teams will look back at that match and see where the holes were found and where they can exploit City as well. But I don't necessarily think that City are going to bounce back from it. I think City, not necessarily in terms of like go back from it and win the league, but I think they're going to take a look. They're going to realize what awful performance that was, and plug in the holes, for want of a better phrase. But I think they're going to learn from it, and I think that's what they'll need to. I don't think they're going to be any more vulnerable going forward. And it's again, they just continue to sign defenders, and it never pays off for them. And the defenders just get worse where they're at, and they're just not. City needs to do better with defenders, full out.
Yeah, I mean, what strikes me, and maybe Joey, maybe you want to interject, but when I go through that list of the players that they've signed, I didn't mention Benjamin Mendy or Danilo, who's now no longer at the club. It feels like the only real success you could probably say was Aymeric Laporte, but the problem is he gets injured all the time. You look at all the players that they've spent on, it just feels as though they somehow just can't seem to find the best kind of template defensively. And even Eric Garcia wants to go. He wants to go for Barcelona, but they're still playing him.
Yeah, exactly. Eric Garcia is the defensive equivalent of Phil Foden, at least if you believe what Pep Guardiola says, all the hype he piles on him. I mean, despite the mess that Barcelona are in, Eric Garcia desperately wants to go. This is well known now. Garcia, I believe, played in this game and again did not do well. I completely underestimated the amount of players that they'd signed and the amount of money they'd spent. It's consistently around that 50, 60 million pound mark. I know they're not world record fees, but when the players are regressing within about 8 months of joining, it's just not sustainable. I mean, the name I'd completely forgotten was Kyle Walker. He had a 2 out of 10 performance in this game. I think he was possibly the worst player on the pitch, conceding a terrible penalty that no top flight defender should be doing. But again, like João Cancelo was one of, if if not the best right back in the world when he joined Manchester City. Completely wasted. Danilo's inconsistent. Obviously, he's off to Juventus now, but he's actually low-key improved since leaving Manchester City, unsurprisingly. They can't keep going on with this. And the problem is that when Manchester City sign players, the contracts that they're put on, very similar to what Man United and Chelsea experience, is that it's very difficult. John Stones moving away for a few years. Hasn't happened. Rumours of Kyle Walker leaving. Hasn't happened. The only reason they got rid of Danilo was because Cancelo was coming the other way. Unless these players want to leave, it's going to be very difficult for Manchester City to move them on, especially if they've got glass legs like Benjamin Mendy and Aymeric Laporte. Laporte, by the way, who is not as good as he was when he was at Athletic Club Bilbao. I don't understand why people keep saying that, he's improved so much. He's one of the best defenders in the Prem. Maybe he is one of the best defenders in the Prem. But he was a hell of a lot better when he was still playing in the Basque Country. Honestly, I don't think he's worth anywhere near as much as he was when he was back in La Liga. And again, if he keeps getting injured, then Manchester City's defensive situation is going to be dire. I don't buy this whole idea that they're just going to bounce back from this by spending more money. There is a hard limit to how good your team can be if your defence is terrible. Olympique Lyon should not have beaten Manchester City in the Champions League, but they did. Not because of the star players they had going forward, but because they had a defence that could actually turn up in the Champions League. Man City didn't, and for as long as this is the case, they're not going to progress in that competition, and they're not going to win the Premier League title either.
Yeah, I'm starting to think back on my prediction. I had City winning the title at the start of the season, and now I'm rethinking it already. It's match week 3, and I'm already rethinking it. We did have, and as you pointed out, we did have a question about predictions of the upcoming matches. Well, there is a game that I was going to preview it later on, but we might as well now. Man City next are away at Leeds. Now that is a very interesting game tactically. Cam Hall. I mean, Guardiola has listed Bielsa as one of his managerial inspirations in terms of tactics. So this should be a very interesting game. And we saw what Leeds could do at Liverpool, really gave them problems. So should we expect Leeds to give Man City a whole lot of problems on Saturday?
Well, we've seen from Leeds this season, again, I think the game that was probably the most sign of this was that first game in the season against Liverpool, where Leeds really didn't hold anything back. Defensively, obviously, Bielsa is a very attacking coach. It's very all or nothing. Defensively, obviously, Bielsa does have some good defenders in there, the likes of Robert Koch, for example. But as a side, Leeds are going to be very much attacking. They're going to be putting pressure and pressing and putting pressure on that City defence. And obviously, if we saw how weak it was against, we saw how weak City's defence was against Leicester, and as well that this Leeds team put 3 goals past Virgil van Dijk and Joe Gomez at the start of the season, and Alisson as well. 3, arguably the best goalkeeper in the league, and the 2 best centre-backs arguably in the league as well. So Leeds, I mean, are really going to go for this. This will be a lot of goals, and I do think City will concede a few goals this weekend. So I think what City need to do is either, get those top players back, get scoring the other end, or they're going to need some sort of organisation in that midfield to just really hold back and stop goals coming through the other end, because Leeds will be a tough game. They have been clinical. And if we saw as well in the game at the weekend, Leeds didn't score a lot of goals. They only took that 1-0 win, but their defence held up and they were clinical. They took that goal that saw them over the line. And so I think this is going to be a really exciting game. I still think City will have the quality, the attacking quality to win it. It's whether the defence will hold up, I think if Laporte does come back, I know Joe obviously said that he wasn't as good, maybe perhaps that he was at Athletic Bilbao, but he is still miles away, Aymeric Laporte, the best defender the City have got at the moment. If he comes back into that team, shores up the defence, maybe it'd be a better performance, but City really need to improve that defence, or this is not going to be an equally nice result this weekend.
Yeah, you could argue that obviously after this weekend is the international break, and arguably it's coming at a very good time for City. Luke, I mean, I'll just get your thoughts on Leeds versus Man City, a game that exciting as we said for tactical reasons. And if you were a Leeds fan or Leeds player, what kind of mindset would you take? Would you think Man City are there for the taking?
I'd be excited for it. And kind of the main reason for this as well is you look at what Pep Guardiola is often accused of doing in the Champions League. People often say that Guardiola overthinks big matches. And again, we've already spoken about how Guardiola sees Bielsa as one of his tactical kind of idols and one of the best managers in the world. And kind of, you look at how Bielsa's lead set up against Sheffield United this weekend, they basically matched the man for man in the defence. They obviously switched to a back three in order to kind of nullify Sheffield United's front two. And that was a big change. And I just feel like the combination of Bielsa being someone who always shifts around his tactics to kind of combat the other team, and how Guardiola is kind of quite kind of well known to overthink certain matches, this could be quite a dangerous match for Manchester City, in the sense that if they make too many changes, if Guardiola simply overthinks this, it could backfire quite significantly. And again, you look at this Leeds United team, they have absolutely nothing to lose because they've already put in some really, really good performances this season. It's pretty clear at this point that kind of the management that they've got, the board they've got, are willing to back Bielsa. They're willing to really kind of put the money down. They've made several key signings this year as well. And I just feel like this is a game where Leeds can go out with no pressure. They can play their style of football, which kind of has proven incredibly popular both in the Premier League and abroad. And yeah, it's a situation for Manchester City where they have to be very, very careful, because if they defend in a way that is as lackadaisical as we've seen previously, that could kind of cause tears for City. The final point I'd make about Man City as well is that against Leicester, they switched up to a double pivot. They played Fernandinho and Rodrigo in the first half in particular to sit in front of their two centre-halves. And what that says to Man City's defence is simply that Guardiola doesn't trust them, because Guardiola is a manager who has always played a single pivot. He's someone who built his playing career around being a single pivot, whether that be in Barcelona or when he moved over to Mexico too. Guardiola is someone who believes in a 4-3-3 in the sense that you have three midfielders. One of them is kind of sits in front of the defence. And it says a lot that he was willing to abandon that in a match against a team like Leicester, because all due respect to Leicester, they're not a side who we expected to beat Man City this weekend. I cautiously would actually kind of go for quite a high-scoring game here. I think if Leeds score, it could just be a bloodbath. I'm hoping for something like 2-2, to be honest.
There we go. Should be, again, very exciting game. And Tozin, thank you for joining us. As he and Joe, I thought I'd just, bring this. I mean, you saw it already, but I just thought I'd just bring it to your attention. Just feed your ego a little bit more. Tozin, if you're fresher, join in the video description. For real though, join. Come to the welcome meeting tomorrow if you want to join this panel. We'd love to have you. So do that. Get involved, and it should be fun. We'll move on to Liverpool Arsenal. I guess that was the second biggest game, and that happened last night. 3-1. Diogo Jota scored his first goal, and that obviously came after Sadio Mane and Andy Robertson scored for them. And as for Arsenal, Lacazette scored once, could have scored once more at least, maybe a second as well. Joe, I'm assuming you watched this game. I guess the flip side to what we've been saying about Man City was that Liverpool looked very good. I mean, there's still vulnerabilities, sure, and with their high line, but they still looked very good.
For all the scaremongering that we hear from the English sporting press about the lack of signings that they've made, they look an awful lot more complete than the teams that have been making big additions. Diogo Jota, fantastic. I believe first game for Liverpool, obviously getting on the score sheet. I've never seen Diogo Jota as someone who particularly fits that Liverpool system, but he did very well. Any doubts on my end, very much made, and a much better transfer fee than what Man City have just shelled out for Ruben Diaz as well. I was going to talk a little bit about Arsenal's performance, because I think low-key, despite the fact they didn't create much, this could have been an awful lot worse for them. Been very impressed by some of their defenders so far this year. It's disappointing that Gabriel Magalhaes wasn't playing in this game, because I've actually been very impressed by him so far as well. But really, it just looked like Liverpool had a game plan from the off. They played the standard 4-3-3 that we know so well. And it's just impervious still. These opposition managers just haven't found a way through it, because on top of incredible individual performances, the team cohesion in that Liverpool team, the balance that Manchester City don't have, that Chelsea don't have, that Man United don't have, is just so abundant in Liverpool. One of the most balanced teams in all of Europe. And they never really look under pressure from the start of the game. Van Dijk and Gomez soaking it up brilliantly. Robertson defensive all you like. He actually managed to get on the score sheet in this game from the left back position. And that front three, again, Salah, Mane, Firmino, it seems like Mo Salah is making less mistakes this year than he did last year. Premier League teams never get better the year after they win the Premier League title, at least in the last 10 years. But individual components of this Liverpool team are very close to the level that they were at when they were barnstorming last year. So an unsurprising result. Credit Arsenal for what they did right, but ultimately Liverpool look unusually dominant at the beginning of this Premier League season.
Yeah, well, and I'll ask you about Arsenal in just a bit. I just did want to touch upon the winners on Monday. Obviously, this game off the pitch, there was a very exciting post-match interview between Roy Keane and Jurgen Klopp. A very one that saw and egos were bruised. It's fair to say egos were definitely bruised in that one. But I guess I'll ask Luke. I mean, Roy himself, he made the point that, Liverpool they gave away chances. They still looked a little vulnerable with the high line. Obviously, Klopp then, he as you may know, he retorted that it was a perfect game, I think, or to paraphrase his words slightly. So, what do you still are they vulnerable? Do you still find them that they're vulnerable, or is this kind of like it something that just happened on the moment, and we shouldn't put too much weight into their high line?
What I would say is that in English football and in kind of English sports media, we have a tendency to look at risk as being inherently bad, and kind of any negative impacts or any negative factors kind of surrounding a certain tactic is therefore seen as something that's wrong with the team. But whichever way you set up, whether that be kind of Sam Allardyce's very deep, very defensive system, or whether it be Jurgen Klopp, you're going to be taking risks somewhere, and it's very, very obvious that this Liverpool team, especially this year, is designed to play with a high line. So you have the situation where you play with a high line, you play against someone like Aubameyang. As Klopp said, of course, Arsenal are going to get chances in behind because he is just so quick. Arsenal are a team who are very good on the transition, kind of when their players at its peak. So if I was a Liverpool fan, I wouldn't be particularly concerned about this, because we saw Bayern Munich win the Champions League playing a very similar style of play, getting their defence higher, squeezing the kind of area of play where the opposition can kind of build their plays through and then constrict space that way. It's just a different way of defending. So Roy Keane is right. Liverpool did give up chances, but kind of their style of play affords for that, because when you play that far on the front foot, you're going to create more chances, as they did. They scored 3 goals against an Arsenal team that has been improved under Arteta and has been looking kind of one of the better teams in the top 6. So, yeah, no, I think Liverpool are fine.
Josh, you're muted.
Thank you so much. There we go. What I was going to say was that there was a Sky Sports clip, I think, of Klopp on Monday Night Football with Carragher, I think 4 years ago or something. And he was saying about how, the greatest playmaker is a team pressing in an attacking half, because you can create as many chances as compared to having a number 10 kind of create those chances for you. So a very interesting one. And obviously we see with the high line, I mean, Bayern Munich play a high line, and on Sunday they were punished for it by Hoffenheim, which was a very exciting game. But Carl, is it too early to call Liverpool the presumptive winners of this season? Do you give any team a chance to challenge them, or do they look unstoppable at the moment?
As we look with City, it's neither teams to win, it's one team's to lose. We're watching to wait for one team to slip up and not perform as we'd expect them to perform, and that will decide who's going to end up winning the league. We're still to be seen. It's only game week 3. We can still see there isn't a future to Liverpool to mess up. There's still a future for City to still mess up once again. It is a bit early to call, but the way the signs are pointing, you're looking to see Liverpool winning this league. And when we had the stream beforehand, and it really wasn't certain who we would call to win the league. So half of us were saying City, half of us were saying Liverpool. And I think even now you still won't be able to necessarily call it, but Liverpool will be confident that they have the upper hand this year.
Yeah, they certainly look like they will go the distance. On the flip side, Cam, Arsenal, as Joe said, 3-1 looks on paper like a bad defeat, but when you actually break down and look at what they did, there are plenty of positives to take from their performance.
No, certainly. And I think across the season as a whole, I think that those attacking plays that Arsenal have, Lacazette, Aubameyang, really starting to form a really good partnership up front. And Arteta, I think in general, it's the thing we said before the start of the season as well, which is that Arsenal just look a lot more organised this season. Now, yes, Lacazette missed those chances and he probably should have scored at least one of them. But as a team in general, Arsenal are looking a lot better. They don't have the defensive problems, shall we say, that Manchester City, that Chelsea do at the moment. And I think we still, obviously, one of the things that Arteta had last season, which I think was kind of more reflected maybe in the West Ham game a couple of weeks ago, was that conversion. You know, Arsenal had a lot of 0-0s, 1-1 draws last season. That was what stopped them breaking into the higher fights for European places. We saw in the West Ham game that ability to grind out that result last minute. I think this was a bit more of Arsenal coming down to earth after a couple of really good games. But still, as you said, Josh, there is a lot to take from it. They're a lot more organised. They are scoring more goals. This is, I would say, the best that Arsenal have looked since Arsene Wenger. Now, obviously, Unai Emery had that time, and we have to put a bit of caution in because Unai Emery did start off well last season and then fell into that bad bit of form. So it's not going to be easy, and Arsenal have to keep that going. But I think it's encouraging signs at the Emirates, definitely.
Yeah, Joe, just to wrap up our kind of review of this game, I know you mentioned you wanted to talk about Arsenal. You mentioned Gabriel was on the bench. Ceballos, obviously, was a substitute, came on and arguably changed the game positively for Arsenal as well. Do you feel that did Arteta get maybe his team selection wrong? And then again, I'll invite you to kind of just share your thoughts on Arsenal as you prefaced earlier.
There's not really a huge amount more I have to say about Arsenal than what I did earlier, just basically simping over Gabriel Magalhaes, how good he is in that centre-back position, especially in this three at the back that they're playing at the moment. Low-key, I thought David Luiz was pretty good this weekend. Again, that's the centre-back position in which David Luiz was actually pretty impressive for Antonio Conte's Chelsea a few years ago, so that's hardly a surprise. The number one player that's surprised me positively at Arsenal this year, and he probably shouldn't have surprised me because he did very well at Chelsea last year, is Willian. Actually one of the better signings that we've seen in the Premier League this summer. On a free transfer, we were almost certain that he was going to go abroad, probably to a team like Juventus. It absolutely makes sense for him to join Arsenal, all that Premier League experience. And as a foil to Lacazette and the incredibly physically emphasising player that is Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Willian actually adds an awful lot of balance out on that right wing, which Nicolas Pepe, who again was on the bench, doesn't give you. It feels like Arteta's trying to account for far more opposition play styles, not just an Arsenal system, but opposition play styles when he's selecting his first 11. So honestly, I think really this is just a case of they came up against a Liverpool team who are comfortably the best in the Premier League, comfortably the best unit in the Premier League, and they were always going to find it difficult, especially on the road. There are a lot of positives to take from this performance. I like the improvements in defence. I like the move to a three at the back. I like what Willian adds to this team. And they've re-signed Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. That seemed impossible about a month ago, but they've done it. All power to them.
There we go. Some positive stuff. I mean, we've talked about Arsenal's failings for so long. It feels good to talk about their positives, and we'll transition to the game Carl probably cares about the most. The game that started off the weekend, Brighton and Hove Albion against Manchester United. Obviously, Manchester United came out with a 3-2 win. Bruno Fernandes getting a penalty in the 10th minute of stoppage time. A crazy game. Carl, my question is simple to you. How are you feeling a few days after the result?
It's a weird one, isn't it? Because it's rare that you come out of a game that's 3-2 lost and and feel so incredibly robbed by the result. We came away. I think Brighton had a record number of times in which we hit the post. Brighton hit the post 4 times, 3 of which were Trossard alone. The other one was Solly March, who ended up scoring right at the end. It was obviously a brilliant game to watch. It was so back and forth, especially just straight after the goal. All the goals from Manchester United were almost instantly after Brighton scored. And I think Potter probably needs to work on the mentality of coming out just from scoring, because that seems to happen all the time to Brighton. I think that's specifically a mentality thing that needs to be worked on in the Brighton team. But it's a really weird result to see after, if you watch it or even you look at the statistics. Brighton had way more shots, and they were just on top for most of the game. And it's only because United do have those some of the best players in the world that can pull out some magic out of absolutely nowhere, and that's what's going to get them by this season. It's not going to be the all-out play. They're not playing well. They're not looking at all impressive. The way they're going to get wins is that flair of individual magic from players like Rashford, players like Martial, players like Greenwood. It's going to be them getting their goals and getting their results. But from a Brighton point of view, it's going to be disappointing from a result, but Brighton are playing very, very good football at the moment. Even against Chelsea, who that was a disappointing result for Brighton fans. We've been a bit hard done by in results, but Brighton fans can take solace in how Brighton are playing and see that the infinite improvement from previous seasons, and Potter has done an absolute number on the team, and he's really, really improved it. And Joe Spagnoli has said in previous streams that he's probably the best British manager at the moment, and I completely agree. He has done absolute wonders for the Brighton team.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree at the moment. I guess, there were Luke on the flip side. Brighton obviously very well done, just undone by the woodwork a lot of times. Leandro Trossard very unlucky, but on the flip side, Manchester United, should we have expected them to be a bit sluggish from the start? I mean, obviously they had a long Europa League campaign, not many weeks to prepare. Then obviously they came out against Crystal Palace, lost 3-1. Should we have expected a sluggish start, or does this feel, or should we raise the alarm bell ahead of this the next couple of weeks or so?
I would say a little bit of both, because I expected United to start quite slowly. They had obviously the Europa League run, which meant their pre-season was kind of pushed back a little bit. The start of their season was pushed back. So yeah, I expected United to stumble or stroll out of the blocks, for want of a better word. The thing that worries me about Manchester United is the squad building aspect at Old Trafford, because they have the least balanced squad, in my view, in the Premier League, considering how much money they've spent as well. If you look at their players, you've got Donny van der Beek, who, and this isn't a criticism of any of these players as individuals, it's how they fit together. Donny van der Beek is a very good attacking midfielder. That's his job. He likes to progress the ball quickly. Paul Pogba is very good on the transition, likes to get the ball forward quickly, likes to kind of move the ball quickly and move the play quickly. You also then have Bruno Fernandes, who, again, is good on the ball, likes to get the ball forward quickly. There is no one kind of in that attacking unit who likes to slow the play down, likes to kind of control the tempo a little bit more. And it hurts United, because you see there are phases of the game where simply the other team, whether it's Brighton or anyone else, can simply control possession, because United aren't that interested in keeping the ball. So I do worry about United in the sense that they just have a really random team. Even if you look kind of at the favoured lineup that have, it's impossible to fit their three midfielders in the team together unless you play a 4-4-2 diamond to have Matic sitting in deep. And then perhaps you could have Rashford up front with someone else, with Martial. That could work. But apart from that, it's very difficult to see how this United team kind of balances out the talents that they have in their squad and also finds a system that works for them going forwards. I think the key for them is Ole Gunnar Solskjaer simply needs to pick his best 11. He needs to find the tactic that works for them, and then it might be a case of rotating his three midfielders in and out as and when he needs to.
Yeah, we'll come on to transfers to watch out for towards the end if we have time, because United, as you said, very few additions, still kind of figuring out the squad building aspect. But again, I mean, there was so much positivity at the start of the season. You talk about the attacking talent. Cam, did we overlook their defensive issues? Was there anything we overlooked when previewing Man United's chances this season, or should this have been, again, as I said earlier, should this have been expected?
Well, I think for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, to go unbeaten until that Sevilla game in 2020, I think it's only fair now, given his record at Man United, that he's going to spend the rest of 2020 having really patchy results like this. United clearly have fantastic quality in that team. So obviously you have the likes of Martial, Rashford. Obviously the signing of Jadon Sancho, if that does come, a £100 million bid got rejected by Dortmund earlier today. That's going to be massive saga playing out in the rest of the window. But defensively, it seems United were starting to get some things resolved. Now, I don't want to speak on the legal issue with Harry Maguire, but we don't know whether some of that might still be impacting him. Obviously, Lindelof is a good defender, though we know he is very error-strewn. I think that's the thing with this United team, is that they're good players in the defence, but they are the most consistent necessarily. And I think just to flip it to Brighton quickly, because I know I spent the whole of the preview video kind of really rubbishing their chances, really putting them as definite candidates for relegation. And they've really surprised me, actually. And some fantastic players, former Portsmouth centre-back Adam Webster, fantastic. Ben Smith as well, but also Tariq Lamptey. In 2 words, that man, if England don't need more good right-backs, but he has just really shown himself to be really consistent, really have a real flair about him. And I think he's only 19. There's a lot of space for him to develop still. I think he is definitely going to be another Chelsea Youth Academy product that got away from them. He is a very exciting young prospect, definitely.
Yeah, a few things, I guess, to mention with that. We'll obviously talk about Tariq Lamptey later in our transfer bit, because he has been linked to a big club, much to Carl's frustration. And also, I mean, you mentioned England. The England squad is announced tomorrow, I believe, for this upcoming international break. So it'll be interesting to see who makes it in, certainly that right back spot. Joe, just to finish off Man United Brighton chat, anything you want to say on this game? A blank canvas. Anything you want to say?
Anyone who uses the Europa League excuse to justify a bad start to the season, that is an excuse I have only heard in this country. It's pathetic. It is completely irrelevant. The Europa League affects teams in Eastern Europe with squads of about 25 players maximum, far more than it affects these Premier League clubs who can afford to spend 200 million a year and not get punished by FFP. So any United fans that are clinging to that, get out of the rock you're crawling under, because it's completely irrelevant. You just weren't that great this weekend. It's another potential Solskjaer slump, although I don't think United have been terrible at the start of this year. I've agreed with Luke in the past about their squad building. I don't like how unbalanced it is, and I completely agree with that now. I still don't think Bruno Fernandes is the all-encompassing star player that a lot of United fans and a lot of people in the English sporting media think that he is. I think he's just a star player that feeds off great players around him. In terms of defence, I rate Victor Lindelof. I like the fact that Maguire, I don't think Maguire's actually been that bad in recent weeks. I like the stable pairing of him and Lindelof. What surprises me is the transfer business. This is for a club that can really punish other teams in Europe this summer, a team that haven't been as affected by COVID-19, Manchester United. The business is really surprising. I didn't see the Van der Beek signing coming from anywhere, nor do I think he's particularly necessary. What they desperately needed was a left back. At the moment, there isn't even a name being linked to the left back position. The centre back, depth chart issues, whatever's going on with Chris Smalling, whatever's going on with Marcus Rojo, etc., and this Jadon Sancho thing, I still don't see it happening whatsoever. I don't see why he'd leave Dortmund. I don't see why Dortmund would let him go for anything less than what they want. Again, I feel like this is going to be another round of the United board criticism as opposed to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Not a bad start to the season by any means, but this club is nowhere near as complete as a project as some United fans like to think it is.
Yeah, we'll talk about Sancho rumours at Transfer Edition, and I do have a left back name that they've been linked with, which I'll hold it in because I'll see a reaction. We'll see a reaction when we get to mentioning it. I guess before we kind of do sort of look at the other results there, I guess the other noteworthy one was West Brom 3, Chelsea 3. Let's go. I mean, Luke, what happened? What happened there? What happened to Chelsea? Because I guess everyone kind of assumed this would be, a routine win for them. Instead, we saw Callum Robinson run riot over this Chelsea defense, with Thiago Silva immediately looking very uncomfortable at the Hawthorns.
I mean, this was just a classic example of recruitment by FIFA. It was just kind of stick some players together, buy Thiago Silva on a free transfer, and it all will work out fantastically. It's just not how it works in reality. I think on Thiago Silva as well, it was harsh how he was just thrown in at the deep end. He was played on the wrong side of the central defensive partnership, which obviously makes it more difficult for him as well. And as you say, West Brom just ran riot in the first half. It was pretty easy. Chelsea didn't really get out of first gear. What would concern me if I was a Chelsea fan would be kind of how easy it was for West Brom to score, and how the response from Chelsea until half-time was pretty non-existent. It was pretty strange to see. And on the flip side, the crushing thing about kind of what happened to West Brom in the second half was, if you're a newly promoted team that hasn't spent kind of tons and tons of money, and you get into a position where you're 3-0 up against kind of a top 6 team, you simply have to hold on. And this is something that Slaven Bilic was accused of while he was West Ham manager. The team sat back too deep towards the end of the game, and Chelsea capitalised. And Chelsea do have the talented players that can make a difference. This result will be hugely disappointing to West Brom, because it should have been 3 points and it's only 1. And to Chelsea, they can't, for me, take any solace from the fact that they picked up a point here, because this is the game they should be winning comfortably if they used the players that recruited kind of in the right places. And again, what strikes me, and again, this is hyperbolic to an extent, but has Frank Lampard watched some of these players play before they arrived at Chelsea? Because the way that he's put in the team together, Timo Werner's playing in spaces where you wouldn't ordinarily want to see Timo Werner play. Same with Kai Havertz. Again, he was deployed on the wing several times. And it just seems like this Chelsea team should be so easy to put together, but for the first couple of weeks of the season, it's just gone a little bit pear-shaped.
Yeah, I've put down on Twitter. For people who follow me on Twitter, you'll know I'm a big Bundesliga follower, and I have plenty of thoughts on Kai Havertz and Timo Werner where they're being deployed at Chelsea. Joe, I saw you were nodding. I guess I'll let you kind of share your thoughts on this game. So what would you focus on more? Would you focus on more the first half and the defensive deficiencies, or the second half and the positives that they managed to score 3 goals and come back?
It's funny that you mentioned the Bundesliga, because this reminds me an awful lot of a game that should never have ended up like this last year, when SC Paderborn at home managed to get a 3-3 draw against Borussia Dortmund and went 3 goals up inside the first half. It was a very similar debate. Do we focus on the fact that Dortmund scored 3 goals, or the fact that they've just conceded 3 against one of the worst, the worst team in the division in their case? I think for me, as Luke's already alluded to, we have to talk about the defensive makeup of Chelsea Football Club. The concerns at the end of last season, which it didn't really look like the board were addressing in the summer, at least at the beginning, signing Werner, signing Ziyech, signing Havertz. It was a while before we really saw any movement on the defensive front. But similar to Manchester City, it's not like just signing players FIFA style, as Luke puts it, is going to fix these problems. It comes from systematics, and this push towards attacking football that we've seen at Chelsea. I know we want to talk about the development under Frank Lampard, but I really don't think this team is that much better, if at all better overall, than it was under Maurizio Sarri. I genuinely believe that, because the defence has regressed so badly. One thing I've really noticed about Chelsea is also they made Thiago Silva captain. This is my point. Thiago Silva was made captain on debut, despite the fact he doesn't really speak English. It's been a long time since Chelsea have had a strong captain on the pitch. And if you look at this Chelsea's English players, their English makeup, there are very few, if any, actual leaders in there. So captaincy is going to be a problem for Chelsea throughout this year. If they don't address something systematically, defence overall is going to be a major problem for them throughout this year. I'm not expecting Chelsea to win anything this season. If they can win an FA Cup, that's incredibly surprising. They're not going to be in the debate for the Premier League. So ultimately, Chelsea have time to work on this. But the mistakes seem so fundamental, especially in that defensive area. that it makes me wonder how good is Frank Lampard as a manager as part of this project. Yes, they've got time. Yes, they've got resources because FFP is quite frankly out the window this summer. But I'm not seeing the improvements from Chelsea Football Club that you would expect from the players they've signed and the time that they have to put this into action. Not impressed so far this season, although I do still think they're going to finish third.
Yeah, plenty of thoughts there. A lot. I mean, we'll have to wait and see what happens with Chelsea and how much time they'll give Frank Lampard. Just before I kind of ask, Cam, I'll ask you guys what result from this weekend stood out besides ones we've mentioned. But quickly, I should also mention that the two games we talked about, Brighton, Man United, Arsenal, Liverpool, they play each other again on Wednesday and Thursday, respectively, in the Carabao Cup. So, Carl, you'll be seeing a lot more of Man United I think tonight. I guess it is tonight. So I guess you'll be seeing a lot more of them. Cam, I mean, you look at these results. I mean, we've mentioned 4. We've nearly mentioned half of the results that have taken place. Is there one that stood out? Was there a team or performance that stood out from the rest of the games that took place?
Not a team, not a performance, but a rule. And the rule with handballs this season. Now, the boards obviously make the rules in Premier League. They've changed the rules on handballs this season. And my mate I was sat with at the pub, and obviously pub football, the mates you're with, it's not necessarily the most advanced sports journalism in the world. But I think certainly the point is that the rules for handball this season seem to be too much erring on it now being the ball coming to hand rather than the hand coming to the ball. And really typified in that game between Spurs and Newcastle. If you look back at that penalty, that was not a penalty. You know, it clearly was not a deliberate handball. And Newcastle acknowledged they got very lucky. And it was not just in that game as well. Neil Maupay's error that led to the penalty that saw Bruno Fernandes took and won that game there. Again, that was not very much a case of, you know, ball to hand rather than hand to ball. And in fact, in so many games this season, it was a big talking point that came for the weekend. And actually, Sky Sports did this graphic that came out from at the end of Sunday's games. And they said in the first 26 games this season in the league, there's been 20 penalties awarded, by which 6 would be for handball. If this was to keep up the entire season, they're saying that in all 380 games this season, there'd be 292 penalties, of which 88 would be for handball. Put that in a bit of context. Last season in the Premier League, only 92 penalties, 19 of which for handball. Previous season, 103 penalties, 14 for handball. So this rule needs to be reviewed because, as we saw in the Spurs game in particular, because that was kind of the result and the Brighton game were most affected by this, we need clarification over exactly what a handball is, because I think referees are confused and VAR, I think, frankly, is confused as well. And what we're going to see is we're going to see more penalties that don't need to be given. We're going to see more needless penalties for handball as well. And again, we've seen it in not just those games as well. The Crystal Palace game, that was decided on a controversial handball as well. We need to clear that rule up. Otherwise, it's just going to be a talking point that's going to dominate the season and ultimately lead to teams winning unfairly.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things, I guess, to unpack there. And Joe, you'll know this as well. Obviously, the Premier League interpretation of handball has now come in line with other leagues. This was something that was implemented last season, I believe, in Serie A, Bundesliga. Yeah. So this is kind of the Premier League waking up to this thing. And also, it's funny to know that IFAB, the people who make this rule, obviously comprised of the home nations, the football associations of the home nations. So some interesting points there. Carl, I know you were nodding along. Did you feel aggrieved with I'm sure you did as a Brighton fan, but like how aggrieved did you feel at the decision that was made?
Obviously, I was a bit annoyed. You've got to be like, I'm a Brighton fan watching this, and even after the whistle's blown, they get a penalty. It's a bit, it's a bit irritating, but it's basically become like hockey. When you get hit on the foot with the ball in hockey, it's an immediate free hit straight out. And it's become that in football. No matter what you do, if you put the ball on someone's hand, you get a penalty. People will be aiming for people's hands. Well, people surely in the box, you just knock it against someone's hand. If it's anywhere out of their body line, it's become a new tactic. But I think it could be worse. As long as it's the same for everyone, it's not exactly going to be much of an issue. It won't benefit one team more than the other, just because it's just the same for everyone. Yes, there'll be more penalties. Yes, it'll be a bit on the nose, but I don't think it's really going to be that much of an issue.
Yeah. Also, I did forget to mention, I guess because now it's any contact with the hand, it feels like they've tried to remove any doubt, and in turn have now created doubt about the handball ruling. It feels ironic there. Luke, Joe, I mean, I don't know. I'll give you a blank canvas. Was there any other results that we haven't talked about that come to mind as pretty being noteworthy? Or again, do you want to share your thoughts on the handball rule? I'll start with Luke.
What I would say about the handball rule as kind of you already said, Josh, this is something that's been coming down the track for a long time. It's something that they had pretty much everywhere in the world apart from the Premier League last season. And for me, it feels somewhat sloppy on the Premier League's part that they allowed the competition to get to this state, and now kind of the rule has been forced upon the league. Now it's some big surprise. It shouldn't have been a surprise. Everyone should have really known that this was coming. And again, if you look at the IFAB rules of the game for this year, there's a section at the end of the rules where basically it shows all of the changes from this year to the previous year. And on handball, the only thing that's different is kind of what is categorized, what part of your arm is kind of now handball and what isn't. So basically it's the bottom of your armpit and down is handball, and anything above that is not handball. That's the only thing with the handball rule that's particularly changed. And I just feel like broadcasters before the season started should have made a big point of saying we're going to see more handball penalties this year because it's what happened in Italy, in Spain, in Germany last year. It should have been something that we expected. And kind of some of, I think, Jermaine Genus's comments this weekend were just a little bit bizarre insofar as he was saying that the Premier League is so popular because it's this unique product. But at the end of the day, we're all playing the same sport. It should be the same rules in England as it is in Italy. So I feel like either the Premier League has to get on board or has to convince the rest of the world that it has a better strategy on this. The result that caught my eye somewhat unbelievably was obviously West Ham winning 4-0 against Wolves. It's just unbelievable, really. I speak from a place of prejudice on this one because I'm a West Ham fan, but I was expecting Wolves to steamroll West Ham at the London Stadium this weekend, and it was the complete opposite. And I think West Ham played really well, and this system really works for West Ham. I think it's something that David Moyes has stumbled upon, but I'm happy to see it continue. And the reason West Ham was so effective in this match is because we've worked out a way of how to get the best out of Arthur Masuaku. He's a left back who we signed from Olympiacos a couple of years ago, and it's very well known across the league that this man simply cannot defend. He is atrocious defensively, but he's very good going forwards, and he's especially good playing as a wing back. And now we're playing this kind of 5-5-4-1, for want of a better expression. It's working quite nicely. You've got Masuaku running up down that left flank. You've got three central defenders who are able to kind of absorb some of the pressure, and it's looking a little bit better for West Ham. Wolves were surprisingly lackluster in this game. I feel like they have to improve going forwards because this is just a really terrible result for them. They should have, as I said, walked over West Ham quite comfortably. But yeah, it was an interesting match and it was quite fun to watch. The concern that I would have kind of for West Ham as well is how nonplussed Sebastian Haller was when he scored, because he scored, I think it was the 90th minute with a header. He recently came on as a substitute and there was just absolutely no reaction whatsoever. He scored, kind of turned around and started walking back as Declan Rice jumped on him. And this is a player who West Ham signed for a lot of money last season. The club were, to a certain degree, in trouble with FIFA over not playing or not paying the installments on the transfer until kind of late this summer. He's not someone who West Ham should be looking to upset because he's clearly a very talented player if used in the right way. And last season, West Ham never used him in the right way. They just kind of stuck him up in front on his own and just assumed that he'd be able to play as that big target man player. It's not his game. So yeah, I'd be worried that Haller perhaps might be looking to leave at some point if he really is that unhappy. But overall, a really positive afternoon for West Ham.
Yeah, and another surprise result, I guess, from this weekend was that result. Very good win for West Ham. Joe, I'll give you the final word on this weekend's action, and I'll just quickly. I don't know if it's just me or not, but I feel like VAR. There's been fewer complaints about VAR as much. I think like the handball kind of rule has kind of overshadowed VAR, and maybe it's because it's year 2 and maybe we're more used to, I guess, VAR being used, or maybe it's being used more effectively. And I guess that would be my word. I mean, with the handball thing, maybe it'll take a year or 2 just to get round, for English fans to get round to it. But anyway, Joe, the final word on this weekend.
You're absolutely right in that there have been fewer complaints about VAR. However, I'd argue that's because the English, quite frankly, couldn't have complained more about VAR in the first half of last season, so it's hardly a surprising development. I'm glad Luke talked about West Ham 4, Wolves 0. Very impressed with how West Ham used their width. Who would have guessed that in this game, West Ham would be the team that used wide play more effectively than Wolves? Masuaku, great comments. I really like the fact that Masuaku coming forward allowed Pablo Fornals to play more in the centre, aka where he should be playing. Sebastian Haller, again, you need to get the best out of him. I'm not obviously he barely played in this game, so there's very little to talk about. But again, for all the doom mongering I was spelling about West Ham United a few weeks ago, I was very impressed with this performance. The other game from the weekend, which Sky Sports have already talked about in great detail, is Fulham conceding 3 goals at home to an Aston Villa team who quite frankly didn't look very good. Fulham are looking like potentially one of the worst Premier League teams that we've seen in our lifetime, completely unable to sign defensive players. Yes, that's part of the problem, but you also need to say this Fulham team that's playing dreadfully at the back this year looks very, very similar to the one that was playing dreadfully at the back 2 years ago, except, Dennis Adoy is even worse now. Tim Ream is even worse now. Michael Hector on possibly what must be now about his 20th loan from Chelsea Football Club, playing terribly in this game. Fulham, it's Scott Parker. Anyone who continues to use this ludicrous idea that the top of the Championship and the bottom of the Premier League are ridiculously close, that clearly isn't the case. Fulham looked fairly confident coming up, but both times they've been in the Premier League in the last few years, they've looked absolutely abysmal at the back. I honestly think that Fulham could finish bottom of the table this year less than 10 points if they don't sort out any of these defensive problems, because right now, they look so bad, even by comparison to what Slavica Jokanovic put forward a couple of years ago. Final comment on this handball thing about penalties and whatnot, people saying it might not be an issue as fans get used to it. You've already mentioned Serie A. This was the rule for us last year. Serie A had more penalties with 4 games to go last year than in the rest of the history of the league. So the handball ruling made a massive impact over in Serie A. It changed an awful lot of games. With the refereeing issues that we've already talked about so far, this is going to be a problem in the Premier League this year. It is going to change the dynamics. And as you've alluded to, Josh, I suspect it's going to be the number one flashpoint for the fans to complain about this year, because they've already forgotten about VAR, thank God.
There we go. That is this weekend tied up nicely by Joe Spagnoli. And yes, I do think the handball rule, I think it's just, it feels like, when you first try something, of course, it's going to be a bit of a shock. And then I feel like eventually fans are going to get their heads around it. Looking ahead to this weekend, because we're not doing a stream on this Saturday, but we will next Saturday. So we'll be back for week 1 programming. Just quick previews. Carl, Brighton are away at Everton. Quite a tough fixture with the way Everton are playing. Any thoughts on that game?
Oh, incredibly tough. I can't imagine Brighton going anywhere near getting close to winning that game. I think it'll be a game in which Brighton learn to deal with Everton just picking holes. I can't really Everton are just really good at picking holes this season. Like Calvert-Lewin is unbelievable in front of goal at the moment, especially with the service he's getting. It's just an incredibly tough fixture. I'm not expecting anything from Brighton. I think this is going to be a game in which we're going to learn a lot from and just kind of understand our own faults and learn from them rather than expect much of a result from this one. But it could be interesting, I think, with Brighton coming off the back of a very, very attacking performance against United. It could be interesting. We could get a goal or 2, but I'm expecting a massive goal fiesta from Calvert-Lewin.
There we go. And Luke James, I guess similarly, West Ham away at Leicester. Again, bit of grim reading. It doesn't look like a great fixture for West Ham fans.
Yeah, I'm not particularly optimistic from a West Ham perspective. I'm not optimistic about West Ham full stop, to be honest. I think West Ham season really depends on potentially signing anyone who can kind of add quality to this team. As we've already said in this show, I think Leicester surprised a lot of people against Manchester City, and I think the scoreline flattered them to an extent. I think they're good. I don't think they're 5-2 against Manchester City good. And it depends on who's fit for them. If Vardy's playing and if Vardy's firing, that's a big problem for West Ham because, as we've said, quite slow defensively. If it's a back three of Angelo Ogbonna, Aaron Cresswell, and Fabian Balbuena, that's quite concerning because Vardy will just simply eat up the space in behind the defence. So yeah, it could be a back against the wall performance. From a West Ham perspective, I think Leicester will look to this as somewhere where they can pick up another 3 points and start to build towards the season that they'll be hoping to have. Because again, a lot of people have written Leicester off. A lot of people have said, yeah, they're not going to perform so well, especially with the Europa League. Of course, not a popular argument with Joe. But this will be a true kind of opportunity for them to say, no, we are in this conversation. We are going to beat the teams that we should be beating. And as I say, this is a team who Leicester should comfortably be beating in West Ham.
Yeah, again, it looks like a difficult trip for the Londoners. Cam, any game stick out to you from this slate? We've already talked about, obviously, Leeds, Man City's probably, for me, the standout one, but is there any fixture here that kind of takes your fancy?
Obviously, in terms of the big six, Man United, Spurs, obviously we've seen a lot of pressure on Ole Gunnar Solskjaer emerging, but United had a good record against the big six last season. They seemed to play better against them than they did mid-table lower league teams in the rest of the league. I think Tottenham obviously didn't look very convincing in that first game against Everton, but we've really started to see the last couple of games, Tottenham really starting to find their feet again. That last-minute penalty against Newcastle take that out. But, the play between Harry Kane and Son Heung-min really seems to be working. I think it'll be interesting to see how they integrate the new signings. I think Gareth Bale is back this weekend. Or
not entirely sure, but he might be. Let's assume he might be.
Again, I think for Spurs to have Gareth Bale, I think Reguilon's a good signing as well. That team's starting to come together. United, Jadon Sancho or not, they need to start getting in those performances and starting to look more convincing. This is a potentially big game for the top four because I said at the start of the season Spurs weren't near the top four. But having seen how United have played so far, having seen how Chelsea have played, and having seen the business that Tottenham have done, both Tottenham and Arsenal, I think are back in that race for the top four now. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see the dynamics of that battle and see really how it develops through this game.
Yeah. Joe, just briefly, any game take your fancy besides the ones we've mentioned? Or
Two games.
Is there one we've mentioned?
Two games I'm looking forward to. One you've already mentioned, Everton versus Brighton. My prediction that Dominic Calvert-Lewin would run Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang incredibly close in the race for the Golden Boot. My goodness me, what an inspired prediction that's turned out to be so far. I've been really impressed by Calvert-Lewin at the moment. Really, I mean, if Kane doesn't start firing on all cylinders again, you have to question that England starting position eventually. I'm really liking what I'm seeing from Calvert-Lewin, and I think this is possibly going to be Brighton's toughest game of the season so far, so don't expect too much from it. Maybe this is because I'm an annoying football hipster who is crying at the current death of defensive football across the continent. I'm actually really looking forward to Newcastle versus Burnley because I want to see if Newcastle's clutch signings are going to be enough, especially late in the game, to break down one of the few teams in the Premier League who really care about defensive football, which is Burnley Football Club. Newcastle, again, they haven't been amazing so far this year. We weren't exactly expecting it. But again, I want to see what Wilson can do. I want to see what their midfield can do. I want to see if their defence can out-defend Burnley. Looking forward to that game, although I think you can probably tell I'm not going to be watching it.
Yeah, I didn't expect you to be honest. Not when there's games like Lazio, Inter, and Juve, Napoli, big games in Italy. I don't expect you to be honest. Right, we've got time for transfers, and we'll talk. I mean, there's been a few that are mooted, so we'll run through those, and then we'll run through potential ones to look out for concerning the Premier League in the next few days. So Leeds are going to sign Mikel Cuisance from Bayern Munich for about 20 million euros. Wesley Fofana going to Leicester from Saint Etienne, possibly for 40 million euros. Alex Telles to Man United from Porto. Joe, that was the left back talking about. 18 million euros is what Porto want. I'll start with those three. Luke, does any of those stand out between Cuisance to the Leeds, Fofana to Leicester, and Telles to Man United? Which one would you get excited about?
I'd go Cuisance to lead simply because it's slightly more out of left field, and I think it'll be interesting to see what he can do, kind of solidifying his place in a first team at a top flight club. But yeah, it's been a weird transfer window as a whole because obviously the impact of the coronavirus is obvious to see, and teams have been looking in markets you wouldn't ordinarily expect them to. Usually, you'd think this kind of transfer would be kind of on a loan basis rather than permanent. So yeah, I think it's interesting Leeds' recruitment strategy and how that all fits together. And on kind of a cohesion perspective as well, Leeds have signed quite a few players recently. They've added kind of a few players over recent weeks. So if they add, and it looks like they are going to add another one from Bayern Munich, it will be interesting to see how it affects kind of their early season form because they have been impressive so far. Whether or not this backfires kind of remains to be seen.
Yeah, and not meaning to kind of jump into Bayern Munich knowledge, but seems a strange one for me in terms of Bayern Munich. And we'll talk about Bayern Munich looking at right backs in a bit, but strange one considering Javi Martinez looks like he's going to leave. They've obviously lost Thiago. And Cuisance is an interesting one. He forced his way out of Mönchengladbach because he wanted a bigger club. Then he went to Bayern, and it looks like he's forcing his way out of Bayern to play regular football. So an interesting character for Leeds, for sure. Cam, we also had Ross Barkley's going to Aston Villa on loan from Chelsea, and Ademola Lookman is also going to Fulham on loan from RB Leipzig. Barkley to Villa, do you think that changes your expectations of Villa? How significant is this move for them?
He adds quality. And Barkley is always, I think he's been a kind of lost part of this current generation of English football. I think partly through his lack of desire, injury, and his poor performances all kind of combining into three. I think a move to Villa will get him regular starting football. He wasn't going to be in the Chelsea starting 11 this season. There's far too much quality in that midfield, even if it's not playing well together. So he's obviously going to get some football. He will bring some quality to that Villa team. I think the combination of him and Jack Grealish will be interesting to see. And just to note on Aston Villa as well this season, 2 wins from 2 so far. They look a slightly better side than they did last season. They look like they mean business. And it's something like Ross Barkley, even if he doesn't bring a lot to the team, it's at least a statement that Villa are here to mean business now, and that can only be good for them for other transfer business that they want to do.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see what Villa do in terms of business. I know they've been linked with Milo Rashica for a long time, and a host of other players, so it'll be very interesting to watch. Now, I guess in terms of rumors, Carl, Tariq Lamptey recently linked with a move to Bayern Munich. It's been reported by some that Brighton want at least £25 million or something to that effect. Would you entertain any offer for Tariq Lamptey at the moment?
Brighton aren't necessarily a selling side, so if we're going to sell one of our star players, even I'm going to say star player, he's 20 and he's literally one of our star players. He's first ever actual season starting with us, but he's heading off. I think he'll be gone, but there will be a bit of uncertainty around it because he moved to Brighton from Chelsea in order to actually get some game time because he was contesting with place with James, which I think they probably made the wrong decision there now looking back on it. And I think he'll go because how can you not want to go to Bayern Munich, one of the best teams probably in the world / Europe at the moment, and it should be interesting. I don't want him to go, let's be honest, but he probably will, especially also with Brighton. There's another we might even lose Solly March as well, so that is a massive kind of removal from this team because RB Leipzig are looking to buy Solly March. Apparently they're moving in on him at the moment, whatever that's supposed to mean. Apparently that's going to happen, and that kind of terrifies me as a Brighton fan, especially because I wanted to get Solly March on the back of my shirt. We could lose probably one of the best parts of our team if we lose both Lamptey and March. So it'll be interesting to see how that completely changes the dynamic of Brighton's team.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was only giggling because Joe Spanioli's face to see Solly March linked to RB Leipzig was a picture in itself.
That is not a move that makes sense for any party. Like, he is not an RB Leipzig style player. He's also, it sounds odd, but he's too old for RB Leipzig to sign him as well.
He's not old.
He'd be competing with
No,
Angelino.
that's the thing.
for that
He's not that
side.
old, but he's too old for Leipzig. They don't tend to sign players at that age.
I really don't. I don't think
Angelino's
so.
Angelino's what, 24? He's not quite young. He's not exactly a young player for them to have on their left side, to be fair. But I digress. And as for, right back's going to Bayern, obviously we don't have time to talk about it, but obviously Serginho Dest spurned Bayern for Barcelona. An interesting move. Probably did it to get more. I imagine he'll get more game time Barcelona with Semedo's departure. So an interesting one for sure. I know Luke and Joe nodding along. It's an interesting move for sure for a young man who looks set to be one of America's best young talents. Joe, Fabrizio Romano reported last night Spurs are looking to sign Milan Skriniar from Inter. For Inter, apparently wants 60 million euros. You've watched Skriniar a fair bit. Any thoughts on him? Should he go? And would he be a good signing for Spurs?
Of defenders in that ilk, kind of slow, big, pure defensive players who aren't particularly good with the ball at their feet, I can't think of a player that fits that mould better than Milan Skriniar currently going, because it's kind of an outdated style of defender. He doesn't especially fit Antonio Conte's current system at Inter. He got rotated out of the team far more than you'd expect over the last 12 months or so. So I can see why they'd sell him. I honestly think he's worth that fee, which is crazy for me to say. I think he's one of the best centre-backs in the world. I don't think it makes sense for Inter in the long run to sell him. I don't know if he especially fits Tottenham Hotspur, although I think Jose Mourinho would quite like the guy. This late in the window, I'm not entirely sure that it happens, but Spurs have a lot of work to do at the back. But obviously, it's Mourinho management. He loves his defenders. They've just lost Jan Vertonghen, who's probably still their best defender. So they need a star to bring in. Skriniar can do that. It's a big fee, though, 60 million. So they need to be responsible with that.
Yeah, should be. I mean, an interesting one, and we'll see if Spurs can get that over the line. We're going to run a little over because there are 2 or 3 big transfer sagas I want to finish on, and they are arguably the biggest ones concerning the Premier League that we're still watching out for. And I wanted to get everyone's thoughts on it. And 2 of them are with Arsenal. Obviously, for those who don't know, I'm wearing Lyon's 3rd jersey, Houssem Aouar. Obviously, a fantastic player for Lyon, and one I would say they would love to keep desperately. If you look at they drew with Laurent on the weekend, they looked really bad creative wise. So they need to keep him, but he seemingly, Lyon have rejected one offer for him. Arsenal expected to come back with another one. The other one, obviously, Thomas Partey from Atletico. Arsenal have long been linked with him throughout the whole summer, as far as I know. But there's been no updates on that. Luke, James, do we think Arsenal? We know Arsenal want to make one or two of both of those signings. Do we think they'll make either or one or two of them?
Personally, no. That might be slightly harsh on Arsenal. I just feel like they've started the season relatively well. Of course, they've got a number of targets who they'd like to bring in, but is this the optimal time to sign a player like that? We've already started the season. Arsenal already in fairly decent form. Are they going to want to disrupt the squad? Of course, if they can get the player in, they'll get the player in, and it'll be fantastic. And he's clearly a very, very talented player who did so well at Lyon last season. I just doubt Arsenal's kind of willingness to spend that much money towards the back end of the transfer market. And again, I'd be happy to be proven wrong, because I think Aouar's a fantastic player who would be kind of one of the best players in the Premier League in the years to come. Not quite yet now, but he's kind of on that trajectory. For Arsenal, it's tricky with Arsenal because they've had this record of never really committing in the transfer market. Has that changed? Kind of, obviously, there's been changes behind closed doors at Arsenal as well. Aubameyang finally signed the contract to much fanfare on Twitter. That was probably the weirdest kind of signing announcement the world will ever see. But no, I'm definitely on the skeptical side with this. I don't think it will happen in this window.
Joe, I would argue that the announce Havertz hashtag has been replaced by the announce Aouar hashtag, which has been annoying to watch on football Twitter, but it is part of the game as it is right now. Do you think Arsenal land one, both, or neither in terms of Aouar and Partey?
I don't want to bash Arsenal at all. I do agree with Luke James that this isn't the ideal time to sign someone, especially for that kind of fee in your midfield area, especially considering, look, Arsenal seem to have made improvements, and I don't think midfield is the number one area that they need to focus on or keep an eye on. Hussam Aouar wants to join Arsenal, which is a crucial thing here. That could bring down the asking price by a good few million euros. I'm a huge fan of Hussam Aouar. I think he'd do really well in the Premier League. But for me, there's a lot of Arsenal players that have kind of come out of the woodwork and, improved after massive lapses in form. With the improvements that Mikel Arteta has made, I would rather they held off until January, save the money for now, and try to regenerate Lucas Torreira. Lucas Torreira was the player that was supposed to come in and be this no-nonsense, do-it-all midfielder that Arsenal have been looking for, and he was amazing for the first few months. Then he went off the cliff because it's Premier League midfielders and they don't know how to physically condition. Lucas Torreira is a fantastic player. They've been unable to sell him because the Italian clubs don't want to pay the money. He's a talent for the future. He's still incredibly young. I would rather Arsenal just commit to him, get him some game time, focus on him, rather than blowing 60 million on Hussam Aouar. As for Thomas Partey, I don't really see how it fits. He's better off at Atletico. I don't think that's going to happen either way.
I'll just say that from what I know Torreira's been linked with Atletico Madrid. So that might be a move that happens to join the Costa, Suarez, Simeone trio of snarling players that will definitely cause you, give you a lot of scares. I guess the final one, Sancho to Man United. We've heard it all summer, pretty much ever since Joe. We've had it all summer. We've talked about it a lot. Cam, I know, do you think this? I mean, I'll go around the horn with everyone on whether this deal gets done or not. But I'll start with you. Do you think Sancho to United? Do you think it gets done or not by the time the window ends in a couple of days?
This feels like a last chance saloon. Definitely. Yeah. I think we saw the bid got rejected today. I reckon there's one more bid that United can do. But if there's no more bids after that, Sancho's staying at Dortmund. And I think increasingly, Sancho has been increasingly kind of all content, at least, with the idea of staying at Dortmund, at least for this season. I think United have far more bigger problems than Jadon Sancho at the moment. I think he would add a lot of quality to that team, but I think there are far bigger issues than not having Jadon Sancho right now.
Right, and we'll go around the horn. Carl, do you think Man United will sign Jadon Sancho or not by the end of this window?
Absolutely not. It's not going to happen, is it? Like, not that they need it, but it's not going to happen. I think I can't explain why I don't think it's going to happen, but the fact that it's been going on for so long and so many times, they're just like, nope, not happening. And then they up the price. Nope, not happening.
Oh, have we lost Carl?
His anger has phased him out.
Right. Well, I think when the message was clear, I think his answer was clear. I'll just check if he comes back or not. And I'll put him back in. Luke, we've heard for weeks now that we've been told personal terms not an issue. Agents' fees are now sorted. It's now just the straight up fee. And Borussia Dortmund have refused to budge. They've been consistent in their stance. Do you see it changing in the next few days or nothing?
No. Simply kind of for the reasons that we've already said. Dortmund aren't under pressure to sell. They're perfectly fine operating as they are. Sancho's a player that it probably brings more value to the team if he's on the pitch than if they sell him. And again, are Dortmund going to be in a huge rush to go out and replace him if he were to leave this window? Probably not anyway. So I don't think it makes sense for Dortmund particularly to sell him at the end of the window. I don't think they need to. For Sancho as well, as much as he'd be happy to go and join Manchester United, again, we've spoken about how he's agreed personal terms or personal terms won't be an issue. Again, a year for him isn't a huge issue because you spend another season in the Bundesliga with Dortmund, have another decent season, play with lots of fun, really exciting young players, build up your reputation even more. And in a year's time, you probably earn more money at Manchester United than you would this season anyway. I don't think for Dortmund or for Sancho, there is a huge need to rush. And again, Sancho is an English player who plays in a fantastic team in a very, very strong league, who realistically this time next year is going to be worth more money anyway. So United either need to kind of stump up the cash now or perhaps miss out on a player who they desperately, desperately need. And to be honest, I think kind of looking at the trajectory Manchester United on, this is a little bit harsh. Is there going to be a point where Sancho overtakes where Manchester United are at the minute? Because if they don't sign him soon, it will be a situation where Sancho is kind of into or approaching his prime, approaching kind of his early mid-20s. And you look at Manchester United at the moment, and we're not really talking about them as being contenders for the title. Is kind of in a year's time Sancho going to be that interested in that? Who knows? But for me, this year, it's not going to happen simply because we've been talking about this for too long. When these deals become so protracted, it gets to the point where it just seems kind of just destined to foul. So yeah, for me, this season is a non-starter, perhaps kind of in time for or after the Euros next year.
Joe Spagnoli, I'll just quickly say that it doesn't seem like Dortmund had a pretty bad weekend. They lost to Augsburg 2-0, and keeping Sancho around obviously is a massive help for them. And also, it could be argued Sancho has more suitors next season if he sticks around. A lot more clubs will hopefully maybe have their finances built up back again after this coronavirus. After the coronavirus has impacted them. And yeah, I mean, your thoughts. Just take us out. Does this long running saga come to an end in a couple of days, or will it just drag on till next summer?
I don't think it's going to, for all the reasons that have been stated so far, but I also don't think it necessarily needs to. If the agent fees have been agreed, if the personal contract's in place, if Jadon Sancho wants to join Manchester United, this is far from the last opportunity he's going to have. The guy's 20 years of age. He can leave Borussia Dortmund whenever he wants. You know, yes, the fee's going to go up, but if there's any club in England that's going to stump up a ridiculous fee for a young English player, it's Manchester United. They will make that fee happen. They will make that move happen if every party wants it to. However, they probably don't have the money at the moment because, and I need to say this, their stance over Chris Smalling is absolutely ridiculous. Either sell him or don't. We're not going to pay 20 million for him. He doesn't want to play for you. You've pushed him out of the club. Let him come to the club that he's wanted to for an entire goddamn year, or you don't get Jadon Sancho. It's as simple as that. Boom.
You know, I just remembered that this time last year, Harry Maguire, Man City really wanted Harry Maguire. We could have seen Harry Maguire in a Man City uniform, which would have been, again, astronomical fee. But United paid 80 million for him. And there we go. So with that, that's going to bring this freshers edition of the Quaran-Stream to an end. My thanks to Cam Hall, who hosts the Alternative View, which will be back, I presume, throughout this coming term. Luke James. Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, just going to say, we did our Freshers Week live stream yesterday. We're broadcasting, releasing the package on Raw Friday, 11 a.m. Don't know if it'll be the same time, weeks 1 through 10, but we will be back, and hopefully the lighting won't disappear throughout the middle of the shows. Fingers crossed.
It's yeah. I wonder if anyone's noticed. Luke James, editor for RAW Sport, thank you as always for coming on. Great to talk hockey, great to talk football, great to talk F1 with you as always. Is there anything to plug from the RAW Sport side?
Nothing majorly. The first edition of the paper's out this week. The freshers edition, there's some exciting stuff in there. I'll plug what's on the back page. We've got a feature-length article that talks about all of the local teams to Warwick, kind of with a view of kind of getting people more immersed into what's on your doorstep. So there's stuff about Coventry Blaze, Coventry City, Leamington FC, both of the Wasps teams. So yeah, there's lots there. And in the weeks to come, hopefully this weekend, I'll be at Coventry United versus Liverpool, doing updates for that in the Women's Championship. So hopefully this year will be quite exciting for the BOR. So yeah, make sure you're following us. Kind of, we're everywhere, so you'll find us.
Yeah, big game tomorrow. Man City Arsenal in the FA Women's Cup. And that's a massive game in for sure. Joe, any? I mean, do you have anything to plug, or you just we'll see you?
I do have something to plug. If you pick up the Freshers edition of The Ball, you will find my interview with two members of the indie rock sensations The Big Moon. I interviewed their bassist, Celia Archer, and the guitarist, Sophie Nathan. Apparently, the interview's great, according to their editor, so go check that out. Pick up the Freshers edition of The Ball, because as Luke says, there's plenty of stuff to do. But in terms of Raw Sport, I'll definitely be around, because I'm in Shropshire. It's not like there's anything better to do.
And on that cheerful note from you, we're going to call it there. So thanks for everyone for watching. Obviously, you can watch this on, it's on YouTube. You can watch this whenever. We'll be back next week with regular programming. Use the links down below to interact with our socials, join our groups, whatever.